The screaming erupted from room 412, just as the metal lunch tray exploded against the concrete wall, sending hospital staff scrambling backward in terror. Armed security sprinted down the corridor toward the violent patient who'd already put two orderlies in the ER that week. But then a slender nurse with auburn hair stepped directly into the doorway. No backup, no hesitation, and the 100-pound combat dog guarding the bed stopped mid-growl. The room went silent. Every person in that hallway froze because what happened next defied everything they thought they knew about the dangerous lunatic in room 412. The patient, a scarred, hollow-eyed man who hadn't spoken to staff in 9 days, slowly lifted his head and locked eyes with the nurse. His hand moved in a subtle gesture. The dog immediately sat at attention, and the young nurse everyone dismissed as too soft, too green, too naive for the psychiatric unit just gave a response that made a decorated combat veteran's jaw drop. Nobody saw that coming. Nobody. If you want to see how this impossible situation unfolds, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Rachel Donovan had worked at Riverside Veterans Hospital in Columbus for exactly 11 days when they assigned her to the 4th floor. That alone told her everything she needed to know about how the administration viewed her. 4th floor wasn't a posting. It was punishment, or a test, or both. The psychiatric wing smelled like industrial cleaning solution attempting to mask something far worse underneath. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead in that particular frequency that made everyone irritable. Most of the nurses who'd been there longer than 6 months had that exhausted, hollow look in their eyes. The kind that came from watching people suffer without being able to help them. Rachel pulled her ID badge lanyard tighter as she walked past rooms with reinforced doors. Some had small windows covered from the inside. Others had occupants who stared out at her with expressions that ranged from vacant to hostile. "You're the new transfer from General Med, right?" The voice came from behind her. Rachel turned to find a heavy-set nurse in navy scrubs leaning against the medication cart with her arms crossed. The name badge read Denise Kowalski, RN. Her tone carried zero warmth. "That's me," Rachel said. "Started last Monday." Denise looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. "You look about 12. "I'm 27. "Uh-huh." Denise pushed off the cart and walked closer. "You ever work psych before?" "Not specifically, but That's a no." Denise cut her off. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know what you did to get stuck up here, but 4th floor isn't like downstairs. These guys aren't your regular patients. Half of them have killed people. Most of them don't want help. And all of them can smell fear." Rachel kept her expression neutral. "I'll manage." Denise actually laughed at that. "Sure you will." She grabbed a clipboard from the cart and shoved it toward Rachel. Room 412. Ethan Cross. 53 years old. Admitted 16 days ago after a violent episode at a VA housing facility. Non-compliant with treatment. Refuses medication. Assaulted 2 staff members during intake. Currently under physical restraint observation. Rachel scanned the chart. The list of notations was extensive. Hostile, uncooperative, potential danger to self and others. Military background, details classified. What's classified mean? Means his files got more redactions than actual information, Denise said. We know he served. We know it was combat. Beyond that? She shrugged. Above our pay grade. What we do know is he's been through 6 assigned nurses in 2 weeks. Nobody can get near him. And before you ask, yes, there's a dog. A what? A dog. Big German Shepherd. Certified service animal, so legally we can't remove it even though it's aggressive as hell. Thing damn near took a chunk out of Dr. Silverman's hand yesterday. Denise's expression darkened. Administration wants the dog gone, but we need veterinary behaviorist approval and about 14 forms signed first. Until then, you get to deal with both of them. Rachel looked down at the chart again. Someone had scrawled, "Approach with caution," across the top in red ink. Why me? Denise smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because Sharon Mercer thinks you need toughening up, and because nobody else wants the assignment. She patted Rachel's shoulder with false sympathy. Good luck, sweetheart. Try not to get bitten. She walked away before Rachel could respond. Rachel stood there for a moment, looking at the closed door of room 412 at the end of the hallway. Through the small, reinforced window, she could see movement inside but couldn't make out details. Two security guards stood positioned nearby, both looking tense. She took a breath and started walking. The guards noticed her approaching. One of them, a younger guy with a military-style haircut, straightened up. "You the new nurse assigned to Cross?" "Rachel Donovan. Marcus Webb." "This is Jeff Huang." He gestured to his partner, an older Asian man with tired eyes. "Fair warning, this guy's unpredictable. We've had to intervene 3 times this week alone." "What triggers him?" "Everything," Jeff said flatly. "Loud noises, quick movements, anyone getting too close. He threw a meal tray at Dr. Rosen 2 days ago, caught him right in the face, broke his glasses." Marcus nodded. "And the dog's worse. Won't let anyone near the bed. We tried bringing in animal control yesterday and it went ballistic. Took 4 of us to back out safely." Rachel moved closer to the window and looked inside. The room was sparse. Standard hospital bed, a chair, a small table. But the occupant had rearranged everything. The bed had been pushed against the far wall at an angle that gave a clear view of the door. The chair was positioned defensively between the bed and the window. Even the small waste bin had been moved to create a clear line of sight. The man sitting on the bed was lean and wiry, probably 6 feet tall, but hunched forward with his elbows on his knees. Dark hair with silver at the temples. Heavy scarring visible on his left forearm and the side of his neck. His eyes were fixed on the door with an intensity that made Rachel's skin prickle. And lying on the floor beside the bed, positioned perfectly to guard his left side, was the dog. It wasn't a German shepherd like Denise had said. Rachel could see that immediately. Belgian Malinois. Tan coat with black markings on the face and ears. The animal's head was up, alert, tracking every movement outside the room through the window. "He always sit like that?" Rachel asked quietly. Marcus glanced through the window. "Yeah, doesn't lie down, doesn't relax, just watches." "And the dog?" "Same. They take turns sleeping, we think. Never both at once." Rachel studied the setup for another moment. The positioning, the sight lines, the defensive arrangement of furniture. This wasn't random. This wasn't the behavior of someone having a psychiatric crisis. This was tactical. "I'm going in," she said. Jeff's eyebrows shot up. "Alone? That's not protocol." "Protocol's been failing for 16 days. Rachel pulled out her badge and swiped it through the lock reader. "I'll be fine." "We'll be right outside," Marcus said, hand moving reflexively toward his radio. "Anything goes wrong, you yell." Rachel didn't respond. She pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The reaction was immediate. The dog's head snapped toward her. A low growl rumbled from its chest. On the bed, Ethan Cross shifted his weight forward like he was preparing to move. Rachel stopped just inside the doorway and held completely still. "Permission to enter, Sergeant?" The growling stopped. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The dog's ears pricked forward, confused by the sudden silence from its handler. Rachel kept her voice low and steady. "I'm Nurse Donovan. I'll be checking your vitals and administering your morning medications. I need your permission before I approach." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Ethan spoke for the first time in 9 days. "You military?" His voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper, but there was a sharpness underneath it, the kind that came from years of issuing commands and having them followed without question. "Combat medic," Rachel said. 3 deployments, attached to evac teams in Kandahar. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Not trust exactly, but recognition. He leaned back slightly against the wall, and the tension in his shoulders eased by maybe 2%. "The dog's name is Havoc," he said. "He doesn't like sudden movements." "Understood." Rachel took one slow step forward, then another. Havoc watched her intently, but didn't growl again. She kept her hands visible and her movements deliberate. When she was about 6 feet away, she stopped and crouched down to the dog's level. "Hey, Havoc." She kept her tone conversational. "You're a Belgian Mal, right? I worked with a few of your cousins overseas. Tough bastards. Smart, too." The dog's tail twitched, not quite a wag, but close. "He was with you during service?" Rachel asked, glancing up at Ethan. Ethan nodded once. 5 years, 2 combat tours. Retired him out in 2019. "He looks like he's still on duty." "He is." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They want to take him away from me." Rachel kept her expression neutral. "Who does?" "Hospital administration." That woman, Mercer. She came in yesterday with 2 security guards and said Havoc was creating a hostile environment. Told me they were transferring him to a VA-approved facility pending behavioral evaluation. His hands clenched into fists. They're not taking him. Nobody's taking your dog today, Rachel said quietly. She stood up slowly and moved to the bedside monitoring equipment. I'm going to check your blood pressure now. You'll feel the cuff tighten on your right arm. That okay? Ethan watched her carefully but nodded. Rachel worked in silence, checking vitals and making notes. His blood pressure was elevated but not dangerously so. Heart rate steady, oxygen levels good. She documented everything without commentary. You've been refusing medications, she said after a moment. Don't need them. You're prescribed sertraline for PTSD symptoms and quetiapine to help with sleep. I said I don't need them. His tone had an edge now. Rachel finished her notations and set the tablet aside. You know what I noticed when I walked in here? Ethan didn't respond, but his eyes tracked her movements. You've got clear lines of sight to both the door and the window. You positioned yourself so nobody can approach without you seeing them first. You're sitting on the bed because it gives you elevation advantage, and Havoc's covering your weak side. She paused. That's not psychosis, Sergeant. That's training. For the first time, something like emotion crossed Ethan's face. His jaw worked like he was trying to decide whether to speak. They don't understand, he finally said. None of them do. They see behavior they don't like and call it a disorder. They want to drug me into compliance. Some of them, maybe. Rachel pulled up the chair and sat down, not close enough to be threatening, but near enough to talk without raising her voice. But I've seen real PTSD. I've treated guys coming off missions where they watched their friends die. I know the difference between someone who's dangerous and someone who's just trying to survive. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Why are you here? Because they think I'm too soft for fourth floor, and this is their way of proving it. A ghost of something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. And are you? We'll find out. Outside the room, Rachel could see Marcus and Jeff watching through the window with obvious concern. Beyond them, another figure had appeared, a tall woman in administrative clothing with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression that radiated authority. Sharon Mercer, Director of Psychiatric Services. She looked supremely unimpressed. Rachel stood up and moved toward the door. I'll be back in a few hours to check on you again. In the meantime, nobody's removing Havoc. You have my word on that. Why would you do that? Rachel paused with her hand on the door. Because you're not the problem everyone thinks you are. And because I'm pretty sure if I dig deep enough into your file, I'll find out you've earned the right to have one person in this place actually listen to you. She left before he could respond. The moment she stepped into the hallway and the door locked behind her, Sharon Mercer was on her immediately. Nurse Donovan, my office. Now. Rachel followed her down the corridor, acutely aware of the security guards and other staff members watching. Sharon's office was at the end of the hall, a sterile space with motivational posters on the walls and a desk that looked like it had never seen an actual emergency. Sharon closed the door and turned on Rachel with barely contained frustration. What exactly do you think you're doing? My job, Rachel said evenly. I was assigned to... You were in that room for 12 minutes without backup. You violated protocol. You put yourself at unnecessary risk. And according to the security team, you were sitting down in there. Sharon's voice rose slightly. Do you have any idea how dangerous Ethan Cross is? With all due respect, ma'am, I don't think he's dangerous at all. Sharon's expression went cold. Excuse me? He's not displaying psychotic symptoms. He's not delusional. He's hypervigilant because he's spent years in combat environments where letting your guard down got people killed. That's not a psychiatric disorder. That's conditioning. He assaulted 2 staff members during intake, who approached him incorrectly and triggered a defensive response, Rachel countered. I read the incident reports. Both times, multiple people rushed him at once without warning. That's basic survival instinct for someone with his background. Sharon's jaw tightened. You've been here 11 days, Nurse Donovan. I've been running this unit for 8 years. I don't need a 27-year-old transfer with no psychiatric training lecturing me about patient assessment. Then maybe you should listen to someone who's actually treated combat veterans in the field. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Sharon walked around her desk and sat down with deliberate precision. Let me make something very clear. Ethan Cross is non-compliant, potentially violent, and his service animal is creating a liability issue. Yesterday, that dog nearly bit Dr. Silverman. The day before, it cornered an orderly against the wall for 15 minutes. We can't have a dangerous animal loose in a psychiatric facility. Havoc's not dangerous, he's doing his job. His job is over. Cross has been out of the military for 5 years. The dog needs to be transferred to a proper facility where it can be evaluated and retrained. Rachel kept her voice level. That dog is probably the only thing keeping Sergeant Cross stable right now. You remove Havoc and you'll escalate the situation significantly. That's not your decision to make. Sharon's tone was final. The paperwork has already been submitted. Animal Control will be here tomorrow morning at 800 to transfer the dog to a VA-approved facility in Cincinnati. You'll sedate Cross beforehand so the removal can happen without incident. I won't do that. Sharon's eyes went flat. I'm sorry? I said I won't do that. It's medically inappropriate and ethically wrong. For several seconds, Sharon just stared at her. Then she smiled. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with power. Then you'll be written up for insubordination and removed from this case. I'll assign someone who actually follows orders. She picked up her phone. You're dismissed, Nurse Donovan, and if I were you, I'd start considering whether this job is really the right fit. Rachel left the office without another word. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and hostile glances from other staff members. Word had apparently spread that the new girl had challenged Sharon Mercer directly. By lunchtime, Rachel was eating alone in the break room while other nurses whispered at nearby tables. She didn't care. At 1400 hours, she went back to room 412. Ethan was in the same position, but Havoc's head came up immediately when Rachel approached. This time, there was no growling. The dog watched her carefully as she swiped her badge and entered. They're coming for him tomorrow, Ethan said before she could speak. His voice was hollow. I heard them talking outside. 800 hours. Animal Control. Rachel set down her medical kit and looked at him directly. I know. You can't stop them. Probably not. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the mattress so hard his knuckles went white. I can't lose him. His voice cracked slightly. He's the only thing left. Rachel pulled up the chair again and sat down. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just let the silence stretch between them. What unit were you with? She finally asked. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why? Because your file's redacted to hell and back, which means you weren't regular infantry. And because the way you move, the way you assess threats, the way you've set up this room, that's not standard military training. He stared at her for a long time. Then, very quietly, JSOC Tier 1. Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach. Joint Special Operations Command. That meant Delta, DevGru, or one of the other units that officially didn't exist. How many deployments? 12. His voice was barely audible now. 6 different countries, most of them you've never heard of. And Havoc? Multi-purpose canine. Explosives detection, patrol apprehension. He saved my life 4 times that I know of. Probably more that I don't. Ethan looked down at the dog. After my last mission went sideways and I took medical discharge, they were going to retire him to some training facility. I pulled every favor I had to adopt him out instead. What happened on the last mission? Ethan's jaw tightened. Can't talk about it. Still classified. He looked back up at Rachel. But I came home with this, he gestured to the scars on his neck and arm, and 60% hearing loss in my left ear. Havoc came home with shrapnel in his hip and severe anxiety. Neither of us were the same. And now they want to separate you. They don't see a veteran and his service dog. They see a liability and an aggressive animal. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Nobody here understands what we went through. Nobody cares. They just want me sedated and compliant so I don't create problems. Rachel leaned forward slightly. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Ethan's eyes locked onto hers. I was at Kandahar in 2016 when a JSOC team came through our field hospital after a mission went wrong. 3 operators down, 2 critical. We worked for 11 hours straight to save them. She paused. I don't know if you were one of them. Your file doesn't say. But I know what you people do. I know what you sacrifice, and I know you don't get enough credit for it. Something in Ethan's expression shifted. The wall he'd built around himself developed a crack. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow morning, when they come for Havoc, I'm going to be the nurse they assign to sedate you, and I need you to know that I won't do it. Rachel's voice was steady. I'm going to refuse the order. I'm probably going to lose my job, but I won't be part of taking away the one thing that's keeping you alive. Ethan stared at her like he couldn't quite process what she'd just said. You'd do that? Yes. Why? Rachel stood up and moved toward the door. Because somebody should have done it 16 days ago. She left before he could respond. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in her apartment staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. Sharon would make good on her threat. Rachel had zero doubt about that. By tomorrow afternoon, she'd probably be escorted out of the building with a termination letter and a black mark on her nursing license. But she'd meant what she said. Some things were worth fighting for. At 700 the next morning, Rachel arrived at Riverside Veterans Hospital to find 3 additional security vehicles parked outside the main entrance. Animal control had brought backup. She rode the elevator to the 4th floor with her stomach in knots. Sharon Mercer was already there, standing outside room 412 with 2 animal control officers in tactical gear. Both were carrying catch poles and heavy gloves. Nearby, Marcus and Jeff stood with 2 additional security personnel Rachel didn't recognize. Sharon's expression when she saw Rachel was pure ice. Nurse Donovan, I didn't request your presence. I'm assigned to this patient, Rachel said. I should be here. Not anymore. As of 700 hours, you've been reassigned to general population. Nurse Kowalski will be handling the sedation. Sharon gestured to Denise, who stood nearby with a preloaded syringe and a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. This is wrong. This is policy. Sharon turned to the animal control officers. Proceed. One of them swiped a master access card, and the door to room 412 unlocked with a heavy click. What happened next occurred in less than 3 seconds. The door swung open. Havoc erupted from the room like a missile. The first animal control officer stumbled backward, catch pole swinging wildly. The second one managed to bring up his pole, but Havoc dodged with the kind of precision that came from years of combat training. The dog's jaws clamped down on the padded sleeve of the second officer's jacket and held on. Havoc, out! Ethan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The dog released immediately and retreated back into the doorway, positioning himself between the officers and his handler. Every muscle in the animal's body was coiled tight, ready to attack again if given the command. Inside the room, Ethan was on his feet beside the bed, breathing hard. His eyes had that 1,000-yard stare Rachel had seen in combat zones, the look of someone who wasn't really present anymore, just reacting on pure survival instinct. Everybody back up, Rachel said loudly. Now. We're not backing up, Sharon snapped. Restrain that animal. If you try to restrain him, someone's going to get seriously hurt. Rachel moved forward slowly, positioning herself between the animal control officers and the doorway. Give me 2 minutes. You're not authorized. 2 minutes or this turns into a bloodbath. Your choice. Sharon's face went red, but she jerked her head in reluctant agreement. Rachel approached the doorway carefully. Havoc's eyes tracked her movement, but the growling decreased slightly when he recognized her scent. Sergeant Cross, she said quietly, I need you to focus on my voice. Ethan's gaze was still unfocused, scanning for threats that only existed in his memory. You're not in the field anymore. You're at Riverside Veterans Hospital in Columbus. It's Thursday, May 8th. I'm Nurse Donovan. Remember me? His eyes flickered toward her. Recognition started to filter back in. That's good. Stay with me. Rachel took another slow step forward. Havoc did his job. He protected you. But right now, I need you to call him down. Can you do that? For several agonizing seconds, Ethan didn't move. Then his hand made a subtle gesture, just a slight movement of his fingers. Havoc immediately sat. The tension in the hallway dropped by about 50%. Rachel looked back at Sharon. This is the wrong approach. You're triggering a combat response. If you want to remove the dog safely, you need to do it with his cooperation, not by force. I don't take orders from nurses who, then maybe you should. The voice came from behind the group. Everyone turned. A man in dress military uniform, Army by the insignia, walked down the hallway with the kind of presence that made everyone automatically step aside. He was in his 50s, graying hair cut regulation short, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades commanding respect. Behind him were two more figures in uniform, and one civilian wearing what Rachel recognized as Department of Defense credentials. Sharon's expression went from angry to confused. "Who are you?" The man stopped directly in front of her and pulled out an ID wallet. "Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Army Special Operations Command. This is Major Sarah Rodriguez and Captain James Mitchell. We're here to see Sergeant Ethan Cross." The security guard named Marcus, apparently sharing a last name with the colonel, actually straightened to attention without thinking. Sharon looked like someone had just upended her entire worldview. "I wasn't informed of any military visit." "That's because we're not visiting." Colonel Webb looked past her toward room 412. "We're extracting." The hallway went dead silent. Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Colonel Webb walked past Sharon without waiting for permission, approaching the doorway where Ethan still stood with Havoc at his side. "Chief Petty Officer Cross," he said, using a rank that hadn't been mentioned anywhere in the hospital files. At ease. Ethan's entire posture changed. Military discipline overrode whatever panic response had taken hold 30 seconds earlier. He straightened slightly, and his hand fell to his side. "Sir, we need to talk," Colonel Webb said. "Privately. And we're taking you and your dog out of here, effective immediately." Then he turned back to Sharon Mercer, and the expression on his face could have frozen nitrogen. "Petit, while I'm at it, I'd like to know which member of your staff thought it was appropriate to threaten the removal of a certified military working dog from a decorated combat veteran without consulting the Department of Defense." Sharon's mouth opened and closed without sound. Rachel felt something shift in the air around her, like the moment right before a storm breaks when the pressure drops and you know everything's about to change. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Sharon's face drained of color so fast Rachel thought she might actually pass out. The director's mouth worked soundlessly for 3 full seconds before any words came out. We were following standard protocol for aggressive animals in patient care environments. The dog exhibited violent behavior toward multiple staff members and posed a clear safety risk." "Stop talking." Colonel Webb's voice didn't rise in volume, but the command in it made Sharon snap her jaw shut like she'd been slapped. He turned to the civilian with the DOD credentials. "Agent Torrens, please document everything you're seeing here. Names, positions, exact timeline of events." The man pulled out a tablet and started typing without comment. Webb looked back at Sharon. "Where's the patient file?" "I'm not authorized to release confidential medical records without proper—" "I'm not asking for authorization. I'm telling you to produce the file. Now." Sharon's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Beverly? Bring me the complete file for patient Cross, Ethan. Room 412. Immediately." She ended the call and looked at Webb with something approaching desperation. "I was never informed this patient had active military oversight. His records indicate he was medically discharged in 2019. His records indicate what we allowed them to indicate," Major Rodriguez cut in. Her voice was clipped and precise. "Chief Cross's service history is classified at multiple levels. The fact that you're standing here threatening to separate him from his MWD without clearance is already a significant problem." "MWD?" Sharon looked genuinely confused now. "Military working dog," Captain Mitchell said. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of alert focus that suggested he'd seen recent combat. "That animal you were about to haul away in a catchpole has more operational hours in hostile territory than most infantry units. He's not a pet. He's a decorated military asset." The animal control officers had backed up about 10 feet and looked like they desperately wanted to be anywhere else. One of them was still rubbing his arm where Havoc's jaws had clamped down. The padded sleeve had protected him from injury, but Rachel could see the guy was shaken. A young administrator in business casual rushed down the hallway carrying a thick manila folder. She handed it to Sharon without making eye contact and practically fled back the way she'd come. Sharon passed the file to Colonel Webb with hands that weren't quite steady. He opened it and started reading. His expression grew darker with each page. After about 90 seconds, he looked up at Agent Torrens. Make sure you're getting all of this. I want documentation that Cross was denied appropriate psychiatric care, subjected to forced medication protocols without proper evaluation, and had his certified service animal threatened with removal in direct violation of federal veteran protection statutes. Torrens nodded without looking up from his tablet. Webb turned back to Sharon. Who authorized the removal of the dog? I did. As Director of Psychiatric Services, I have the authority to make decisions regarding patient safety and, you have the authority to treat patients. You don't have the authority to violate federal law. Webb's voice could have cut glass. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and DoD regulations regarding retired military working dogs all supersede your facility policies. Did anyone here bother to check whether those protections applied before you decided to traumatize a combat veteran? Sharon opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. Rachel felt a strange mixture of vindication and unease settling in her chest. She'd been right about Ethan, right about Havoc, right about all of it. But the speed with which this was escalating suggested there were layers to the situation she didn't understand yet. Permission to speak, sir? The voice came from inside room 412. Everyone turned. Ethan had moved to the doorway. Havoc remained at his side, alert but no longer aggressive. Up close, Rachel could see the exhaustion in Ethan's face more clearly, the kind that came from weeks of hypervigilance and broken sleep. Granted, Webb said. Why are you here? Ethan's question was direct. I've been out 5 years. Nobody from JSOC has contacted me since my medical board. Something flickered across Webb's face. Not quite guilt, but close. That's not entirely accurate. We tried to reach you 4 times in the last 18 months. Mail came back undeliverable. Phone numbers were disconnected. VA housing coordinators said you'd moved without leaving forwarding information. I was keeping my head down. I know. And that's on us for not trying harder. Webb's expression softened slightly. But 3 days ago, your name triggered an alert in our system. Someone at this hospital filed paperwork requesting access to your full military records for psychiatric evaluation purposes. Sharon had gone very still. That request got flagged because your file is sealed under national security classifications, Webb continued. When we investigated why a civilian facility was trying to access classified operational records, we found out you'd been involuntarily committed here after an incident at a VA housing complex. We reviewed the reports. We saw what was happening, and we came to extract you before it got worse. Ethan's jaw tightened. The incident wasn't my fault. Havoc alerted to something in the building. Turned out there was a gas leak in the basement, but the facility manager thought I was having an episode and called emergency services. By the time I could explain, I was already in restraints in an ambulance. Rachel felt her stomach drop. The intake report she'd read had labeled Ethan's behavior as paranoid and delusional. Nobody had mentioned anything about a gas leak being confirmed. We know, Rodriguez said quietly. We pulled the fire marshal's report. You were right. Havoc was right. But the system failed you anyway. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Webb straightened to his full height and looked around the hallway at the gathered staff. Here's what's going to happen. Chief Cross and his MWD are leaving with us today. Agent Torrens will be conducting a full investigation into the treatment protocols used at this facility for military veterans. Anyone who wants to avoid being named in a federal review should start getting their documentation in order now. He looked directly at Sharon. Especially you. Sharon's professional composure finally cracked. This is completely inappropriate. You can't just walk into a civilian medical facility and remove a patient who's under psychiatric hold. Watch me. Webb pulled out his phone and made a call. This is Lieutenant Colonel Webb, authorization code Tango 749er Delta. I need immediate transportation for 1 veteran and 1 MWD from Riverside Veterans Hospital in Columbus. Medical escort not required. ETA to pickup location? He listened for a moment. Confirmed. 20 minutes. He ended the call and looked at Ethan. Pack whatever you need. We're wheels up in 30. Ethan glanced at Rachel, and something unreadable passed across his face. Then he turned and went back into the room. Havoc followed, never more than 2 feet from his side. The animal control officers didn't need to be told twice. They gathered their equipment and disappeared down the hallway so fast they practically left skid marks. Sharon stood there looking like someone had just demolished her entire worldview with a sledgehammer. I want it noted that I was acting in accordance with established medical guidelines and facility policy. Then your facility policy is in violation of federal law, Torrens said without looking up from his tablet. I'll need the names of everyone who participated in the decision to remove the service animal. I'll also need copies of all incident reports filed against Chief Cross during his stay here, complete medication records, and documentation of any use of physical restraints or forced sedation. Sharon's face went from pale to gray. Marcus, the security guard, not the colonel, cleared his throat. Ma'am, I think you should probably call legal. I think she should probably call a career counselor, Jeff muttered under his breath. Rachel stood off to the side, trying to process everything that had just happened. Less than 10 minutes ago, she'd been preparing to throw away her nursing license to protect a patient. Now that patient was being extracted by military personnel, and the director who'd tried to destroy her was facing a federal investigation. Ethan emerged from room 412, carrying a worn duffel bag that looked like it had seen multiple deployments. He'd changed from hospital clothing into jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and boots. Havoc walked beside him with military precision, a tactical harness now secured around the dog's chest. I'm ready, Ethan said. Webb nodded. Rodriguez, Mitchell, escort Chief Cross to the ground floor. I'll meet you at the vehicle. The two officers moved to flank Ethan as he walked down the hallway. Other patients had started emerging from their rooms, drawn by the commotion. Most just watched in confused silence as the small group passed. Ethan stopped when he reached Rachel. Thank you, he said quietly. For yesterday. For this morning. For all of it. Rachel felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. You don't need to thank me. I was just doing what should have been done from the start. Most people don't. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then continued toward the elevator with Rodriguez and Mitchell. Webb waited until they were out of earshot before turning to Sharon. One more thing. The nurse. Donovan, was it? Rachel's pulse spiked. Yes, sir. You attempted to remove her from Chief Cross's case this morning. Why? Sharon's expression went carefully neutral. Nurse Donovan is a recent transfer with limited psychiatric experience. I made a personnel decision based on patient safety and appropriate skill matching. That's not what the incident reports suggest. Webb pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. According to this, you reassigned her specifically because she refused to sedate Chief Cross prior to the forced removal of his service animal. Is that accurate? Rachel felt every eye in the hallway turn toward her. I made a clinical judgment call, Sharon started. Yes or no? Sharon's mouth became a thin line. She refused a direct order, to violate a veteran's rights. Webb looked at Rachel. You stood up for my guy when nobody else would. That takes backbone. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. If this place retaliates against you for doing the right thing, call that number. We'll make sure you land somewhere that actually values integrity. Rachel took the card with fingers that felt numb. Thank you, sir. Webb gave her a short nod, then turned back to Sharon one last time. Agent Torrens will be in touch. Make sure your staff cooperates fully. He didn't wait for a response before walking toward the elevator. The silence he left behind was deafening. Sharon stood in the middle of the hallway looking like she'd just been hit by a truck. Her carefully constructed authority had been dismantled in under 15 minutes by people who outranked her so completely she hadn't even realized she was in a fight. Denise was the first to speak. Well, that was something. Everyone back to work, Sharon said through clenched teeth. Now. The gathered staff dispersed quickly, most of them avoiding eye contact with either Sharon or Rachel. Within 30 seconds, the hallway had cleared except for the two of them. Sharon turned to Rachel with an expression that could have melted steel. My office. 10 minutes. She walked away before Rachel could respond. Rachel stood there holding Colonel Webb's business card and trying to remember how to breathe normally. Her hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline crash, probably. She'd stood in combat triage situations overseas without flinching, but somehow this felt more personal. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. This is Major Rodriguez. Colonel Webb asked me to pass along his personal thanks for your advocacy on behalf of Chief Cross. We'll be monitoring the situation at your facility. If you experience any retaliation, document everything and contact us immediately. Rachel saved the number and pocketed her phone. 10 minutes later, she was sitting across from Sharon in that sterile office with the motivational posters that suddenly felt deeply ironic. Sharon sat behind her desk with perfect posture and an expression that gave away nothing. "I'm going to be very clear with you, Nurse Donovan. What happened this morning was an embarrassment to this facility and to me personally." Rachel kept her face neutral. "With all due respect—" "I don't want your respect. I want your understanding." Sharon leaned forward slightly. "You've been here less than 2 weeks, and you've already created significant problems. You challenged my authority in front of staff. You refused direct orders. You inserted yourself into a situation you didn't fully understand. And now we have military personnel and federal investigators crawling through our records because you decided you knew better than everyone else." "I knew better than people who were about to violate a veteran's legal rights," Rachel said evenly. "You knew one side of a very complex situation." Sharon's voice had an edge now. "Ethan Cross has a history of violent behavior. His file shows multiple incidents across different facilities. He's been non-compliant with treatment everywhere he's been placed. The decision to remove the dog wasn't made lightly. It was based on legitimate safety concerns and documented aggressive behavior. The dog was protecting him from perceived threats. That's what military working dogs are trained to do. This isn't a combat zone, it's a hospital, and that animal put 3 of my staff members at risk." "Because your staff didn't know how to approach a veteran with PTSD and an active protection dog," Rachel countered. "If anyone had bothered to consult with someone who understood military protocols, none of this would have happened." Sharon's jaw tightened. "You're absolutely right. We should have consulted experts, which is exactly what we tried to do when we requested access to his military records. But those records were sealed, so we had to make decisions based on the information available to us." It was a reasonable point, actually. Rachel felt some of her defensive anger deflate slightly. "However," Sharon continued, "that doesn't excuse your behavior. You're a nurse, not a military liaison. You don't have the authority to countermand medical decisions made by your supervisors. You don't get to pick and choose which orders you follow based on your personal feelings about a patient." "It wasn't personal feelings. It was medical ethics. From your perspective, maybe. From mine, it was insubordination." Sharon pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. "I'm placing you on administrative review pending investigation into your conduct. You'll be reassigned to non-patient-facing duties until the review is complete. That means inventory management, equipment sterilization, and records filing." Rachel felt her stomach sink. "You're benching me." "I'm following proper procedure for addressing employee misconduct." Sharon's expression didn't change. "You'll receive full pay during the review period. If the investigation clears you of wrongdoing, you'll return to active patient care. If not, we'll discuss next steps at that time." "How long will the review take?" "As long as necessary." Rachel stood up. "Is that all?" "One more thing." Sharon's voice stopped her at the door. "I understand you received contact information from the military personnel who are here. I strongly advise you not to communicate with them during an active investigation. It could be construed as coordination or tampering." Rachel turned back. "Are you ordering me not to contact them?" "I'm advising you that doing so would be unwise." "Noted." Rachel left without another word. The rest of the shift was a blur of hostile silence and pointed looks from other nurses. Nobody said anything directly, but the message was clear. Rachel had made enemies. By standing up for Ethan, she'd made Sharon look incompetent in front of federal investigators. That kind of humiliation didn't get forgiven easily. Denise cornered her in the break room around 1500 hours. "You really screwed up, you know that?" The older nurse poured herself coffee with deliberate slowness. "Sharon's been here 8 years. She's got connections all the way up to the hospital board. You think you're going to win this fight?" "I'm not trying to fight anyone. I just did what was right." Denise laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Honey, doing what's right doesn't pay your bills or keep your license active. You should have kept your head down and followed orders like the rest of us." "Is that what you tell yourself? That following bad orders is acceptable as long as you're just doing your job?" Denise's expression hardened. "I tell myself I've got 2 kids in college and a mortgage. I tell myself that picking battles with administration is a great way to end up unemployed. And I tell myself that naive little transfers who think they can change the system usually learn real fast that the system doesn't change. It chews you up and spits you out." She left her coffee on the counter and walked out. Rachel stared at the wall for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. She looked at the business card Colonel Webb had given her. The number was direct line, no automated system, no voicemail tree, just a 10-digit number with a Maryland area code. She typed out a text message. "This is Rachel Donovan. Thank you for intervening this morning. I wanted to let you know that I've been placed on administrative review pending investigation." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came back in less than 2 minutes. Documented. Rodriguez is coordinating with DoD legal counsel. You did the right thing. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Rachel closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She finished her shift doing equipment inventory in the storage room while trying not to think about how her career had imploded in less than 24 hours. By the time 1900 hours rolled around, she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. She drove home through evening traffic, climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, and collapsed on the couch without bothering to turn on lights. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. The sender was listed as Federal Investigation, DoD Inspector General. Rachel sat up and opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. "Nurse Donovan, this message confirms that you have been identified as a material witness in an ongoing investigation into potential violations of federal veteran protection statutes at Riverside Veterans Hospital. You may be contacted for formal interview within the next 72 hours. Please document any retaliation or intimidation tactics employed by facility administration during this period. Agent Torrens will serve as your primary contact. His direct number is below. Your cooperation in this matter is appreciated." Rachel read the email 3 times before the full implications sank in. She wasn't just a witness. She was evidence. Everything she'd seen, every conversation she'd had, every decision Sharon had made, all of it was going to be scrutinized by federal investigators with the authority to shut down entire departments if they found violations. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt scared. The next morning, Rachel reported to inventory management at 6:30 hours. The assignment was deliberately degrading, sorting through medical supplies in a windowless basement room while listening to the pipes clank overhead. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody made eye contact. She was being isolated. By 1100 hours, she'd reorganized 3 entire shelving units and was starting on a 4th when her phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. "Hello? Nurse Donovan? This is Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Channel 7 News. I'm working on a story about veteran care at Riverside Hospital, and I'd like to speak with you about..." Rachel ended the call. Within 5 minutes, she had 3 more calls from different numbers. 2 reporters and someone claiming to be from a veteran advocacy organization. Somehow the story had leaked. At 12:30 hours, Sharon summoned her back to the office. The director looked like she hadn't slept. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her normally perfect hair was slightly disheveled. "Did you talk to the press?" Sharon's voice was flat. "No. Don't lie to me. I've had 6 different media outlets contact the hospital this morning asking about our treatment of military veterans, and specifically about a patient named Ethan Cross. The only way they could have gotten that information is if someone here talked." "It wasn't me," Rachel said firmly. "I've been in the basement all morning sorting supplies. Check the security footage if you don't believe me." Sharon stared at her for several seconds, then seemed to deflate slightly. "Then how at Federal Investigation?" Rachel said. "Agent Torrens told me he was reviewing all documentation related to Chief Cross's case. That includes incident reports, which are technically public record if someone knows how to request them. My guess is someone in the veteran community filed a FOIA request and started making calls." Sharon closed her eyes. "This is becoming a nightmare. With all due respect, ma'am, this became a nightmare the day you decided to separate a decorated combat veteran from his service dog without proper authorization. Get out of my office." Rachel left without argument. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. By the time she clocked out at 1900 hours, Rachel was so mentally exhausted she could barely think straight. She was halfway to her car when she noticed the black sedan parked near the entrance. The window rolled down. Major Rodriguez sat in the driver's seat. "Get in," she said. "We need to talk." Rachel hesitated for half a second, then walked around to the passenger side and climbed in. Rodriguez pulled out of the parking lot and drove for about 3 blocks before speaking. "Agent Torrens expedited his initial findings. It's worse than we thought." "How bad?" "Cross wasn't the first. We found records of 6 other veterans admitted to Riverside in the past 18 months who were flagged for behavioral issues related to PTSD. 3 of them had service animals that were removed during their stay. None of them received appropriate trauma-informed care. 2 were subjected to physical restraints multiple times. 1 was involuntarily sedated for 48 hours straight. Rachel felt sick. Where are they now? 2 are dead. Suicide within 6 months of discharge. 3 are in other facilities. 1 is homeless and living out of his car in Cincinnati. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. This isn't an isolated incident. This is systematic negligence. What happens now? DOD. Inspector General is opening a formal investigation. CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is getting involved because Riverside receives federal funding for veteran care. And the hospital's board of directors is going to be very interested in why their facility is about to lose its VA certification. Rachel leaned back against the seat. Sharon's going to blame me for all of it. Let her try. We've got documentation that you were the only person in that building who actually followed proper protocol. Rodriguez glanced over at her. You're going to be offered a settlement. What? Riverside's legal team is going to approach you within the next week. They'll offer you money to sign an NDA and walk away quietly. Don't take it. Why would I? Sure, boss. Because if this goes to litigation, you're going to be a key witness. And if you're under NDA, your testimony gets complicated. The hospital knows that. They're going to try to silence you before things get worse. Rodriguez pulled up to a stoplight and looked at Rachel directly. How much do you know about whistleblower protections? Not much. Then you need to educate yourself fast. Because right now, you're the person who exposed a pattern of abuse at a federally funded facility. That makes you both valuable and vulnerable. The light changed. Rodriguez drove another block before pulling over in front of Rachel's apartment building. One more thing, the major said. Chief Cross asked me to tell you something. Rachel waited. He said to tell you that Havoc's doing better. They've got him at a military rehabilitation facility in Virginia where they actually understand working dogs. Cross is getting proper treatment from people who don't think PTSD makes you broken. Rodriguez smiled slightly. He also said that if you ever need anything at all, you call him. He owes you. Rachel felt her throat tighten. I was just doing my job. No. You were doing what most people are too scared to do. There's a difference. Rodriguez handed her another business card. That's my personal cell, not my duty line. If things get dangerous, and they might, you call me immediately. Understood? Dangerous how? People who run institutions don't like being exposed, especially when there's money and reputation on the line. I'm not saying Sharon Mercer is going to send someone after you, but I'm saying you should be aware of your surroundings and document everything. Rachel took the card with hands that had started shaking again. Get some rest, Rodriguez said. Tomorrow's going to be worse. She drove away, leaving Rachel standing on the sidewalk in the gathering darkness. Rachel climbed the stairs to her apartment, locked the door behind her, and stood in the middle of her living room trying to process everything that had just happened. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Stop talking to investigators. You're making things worse for everyone. This is your only warning. Rachel stared at the message for 10 full seconds. Then she screenshot it, forwarded it to Agent Torrens and Major Rodriguez, and sat down at her laptop to start documenting everything she could remember about the past 3 days. If they wanted a fight, she'd give them one. But first, she needed to make sure she survived it. Rachel spent 40 minutes typing out every detail she could remember. Timestamps, exact quotes, witness names, the layout of room 412, the way Sharon's voice had changed when Colonel Webb identified himself. Her fingers cramped, but she kept going. When she finally hit save and backed the document up to 3 different cloud services, it was past midnight. She made the mistake of checking her email before bed. 17 new messages, 12 were from reporters. 3 were from people claiming to be veteran advocates asking for interviews. 1 was from a law firm in Cleveland offering representation. The last one made her stop breathing for a second. The sender was listed as Hospital Administration, Legal Department. Ms. Donovan, you are hereby notified that your employment status at Riverside Veterans Hospital is under formal review pursuant to violations of facility policy regarding patient confidentiality, chain of command protocols, and appropriate interdepartmental communication. A hearing has been scheduled for May 14th at 0900 hours to determine whether your continued employment is compatible with institutional standards. You have the right to bring legal representation. Failure to appear will result in immediate termination. Beverly Walsh, Chief Legal Counsel. Rachel read it twice more, then forwarded it to Rodriguez and Torrens without comment. She tried to sleep but gave up around 300 hours. Instead, she sat on her couch drinking bad coffee and watching the sky gradually lighten through her apartment window. Somewhere in Virginia, Ethan Cross was probably awake too, staring at different walls but feeling the same kind of exhaustion that came from fighting systems designed to grind people down. Her phone rang at 0547 hours. Agent Torrens. She answered on the second ring. "You got the legal notice," he said without preamble. "Yes. Don't go to that hearing." Rachel sat up straighter. "What?" "It's a setup. They're going to use the hearing to establish a paper trail that you violated hospital policy. Then they'll terminate you for cause, which means no unemployment benefits, no good reference, and it poisons any future whistleblower claims you might make." Torrens' voice was calm but urgent. "We've seen this playbook before. They're trying to discredit you before you can testify. So what am I supposed to do? Call in sick. Say you need time to secure legal counsel. Delay as long as possible while we build the case." He paused. "How much money do you have saved?" The question caught her off guard. "Maybe 3,000. Why?" "Because you're probably not going to have a paycheck after this week. Riverside's going to freeze your employment pending the investigation. It's standard retaliation protocol. They can't fire you outright without looking guilty, but they can make your life miserable enough that you quit." Rachel felt her stomach drop. "I can't afford to quit. I've got rent, student loans. DOD has discretionary funds for witnesses who experience economic hardship during federal investigations. It's not much, but it'll keep you afloat while we work. I'll send you the paperwork." This is insane. This is what happens when institutions protect themselves instead of the people they're supposed to serve. Torrens sounded tired. "Get a lawyer. Today. DOD Legal gave me 3 names, people who've handled whistleblower cases before. I'm texting them to you now. Call the first one as soon as their office opens." He ended the call before Rachel could respond. She sat there holding her phone and feeling like the ground had just dropped out from under her. 4 days ago, she'd been a nurse with a stable job and a straightforward career trajectory. Now she was unemployed, broke, and caught in the middle of a federal investigation with people sending her anonymous threats. The 3 names arrived via text 30 seconds later. Rachel opened the first link and found herself looking at a law firm website. The attorney's photo showed a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she didn't lose cases often. Lydia Brennan, partner. Specialization, federal whistleblower protection, employment law, VA system litigation. Rachel called the office number at exactly 800 hours when it opened. The receptionist put her through to Brennan directly. "Agent Torrens briefed me yesterday," Brennan said without pleasantries. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." "Good. Scared means you're paying attention." Brennan's tone was brisk, but not unkind. "I need you in my office by 1100 hours. Bring every piece of documentation you have, emails, text messages, witness statements, anything. We're going to build a timeline, and then we're going to make Riverside's legal team very uncomfortable." "I got a hearing notice for tomorrow morning." "I know. We're not going. I'll file for a continuance citing inadequate time to prepare defense. That'll buy us at least 2 weeks." Papers rustled in the background. "In the meantime, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. Don't talk to reporters. Don't respond to anonymous messages. Don't go near the hospital unless I'm with you. Understood?" "Yes. My retainer is $5,000. DOD will cover it through their witness protection fund, but I need you to sign the paperwork today." Rachel felt a tiny bit of the pressure ease. "Okay. See you at 11. The line went dead. Rachel spent the next 2 hours gathering every scrap of evidence she could find. Screenshots of the threatening text. Copies of her shift reports from the days she'd worked with Ethan. The business cards from Webb and Rodriguez. Medical supply inventory logs showing she'd been in the basement when the media calls started coming in. By the time she left for Brennan's office, she had a folder 3 inches thick. The law firm was located in a converted warehouse downtown with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting. Brennan's office was on the third floor, decorated with framed case verdicts and photos of her shaking hands with people Rachel vaguely recognized from news coverage. Brennan herself was exactly like her photo, sharp-eyed, mid-50s, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. She gestured Rachel to a chair and immediately started going through the folder with the kind of focused intensity that made it clear she'd done this 1,000 times before. "Good documentation," Brennan said after 10 minutes. "Thorough, time-stamped, multiple witnesses." She looked up. "You're military trained, it shows. Combat medic. I learned to document everything because lives depended on it. That habit's about to save your career." Brennan pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Here's where we are. DOD, Inspector General has opened a formal investigation into Riverside's veteran care protocols. CMS is conducting a parallel review because of the federal funding angle. The hospital's board of directors is panicking because they're looking at potential loss of VA certification, which represents approximately 30% of their annual revenue." Rachel blinked. 30%? Military veteran care is a huge revenue stream for facilities like Riverside. They lose that certification, they lose millions. Brennan smiled thinly, which means they're going to fight very, very hard to make this go away. And the easiest way to make it go away is to discredit the witness who started the whole investigation. "Me. You." Brennan leaned back in her chair. "So here's what they're going to try. First, they'll paint you as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. They'll dig into your personnel file looking for any negative performance reviews, any conflicts with coworkers, anything they can use to suggest you're unstable or vindictive." "My file's clean. I've only been there 2 weeks." "2, even better for us. Makes their case harder to build." Brennan made another note. "Second, they'll try to flip the narrative. Instead of them violating veteran rights, it'll become about you violating patient confidentiality and chain of command. They'll argue that you spoke to outside parties about a patient's case without authorization. I spoke to the patient's military command. That's not a violation." "Correct. But they'll try to muddy the waters enough that public opinion shifts. Remember, most people don't understand the nuances of veteran care law. They hear nurse broke confidentiality and they assume wrongdoing." Brennan's expression hardened. "Third, and this is where it gets nasty, they're going to try to isolate you. They'll pressure other staff members not to speak to investigators. They'll create an environment where anyone who supports you gets targeted too. By the end, you'll be radioactive in the medical community." Rachel felt cold. Can they actually do that? They can try. Whether they succeed depends on how many people are willing to stand up and tell the truth. Brennan shuffled through more papers. "Which brings me to our strategy. We're going to need corroborating witnesses, other nurses who saw what happened, security footage from the hallways, anything that proves your version of events. Marcus and Jeff, the security guards, they were there for everything." "Good. I'll subpoena their testimony." Brennan wrote down the names. "Anyone else?" Rachel thought for a moment. "Denise Kowalski. She's the nurse who originally assigned me to Ethan's case. She won't like testifying, but she was present for multiple conversations with Sharon about the dog removal. I'll add her to the list." Brennan looked up. "Here's what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks. Riverside's legal team is going to offer you a settlement, probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. They'll ask you to sign an NDA and walk away quietly. Rodriguez warned me about that." "Good. Because you're not taking it." "Why not?" Brennan's expression went flat. "Because there are 6 other veterans who went through that facility and didn't have someone like you standing up for them. 2 of them are dead. If you take the settlement and sign the NDA, Riverside gets to keep operating the same way they always have. Nothing changes. More veterans get hurt." Rachel swallowed hard. "And if I don't take it, then we go to trial. We expose everything. We force systemic change. And you become unemployable in Columbus for the next 5 years because every hospital administrator in the region will know you as the nurse who sued." Brennan's voice softened slightly. "I'm not going to lie to you, Rachel. This is going to cost you. Financially, professionally, maybe personally. Your name's going to be in newspapers. People are going to say terrible things about you. Former coworkers are going to call you a traitor. It's going to be brutal. But it's the right thing to do. Yes, it is. Brennan closed the folder. So here's what I need from you. I need you to be absolutely certain this is a fight you're willing to have. Because once we file the formal complaint, there's no backing out. We're committed, all the way to the end. Rachel thought about Ethan sitting in room 412, with Havoc at his side, exhausted and alone and treated like a threat instead of a human being. She thought about the 2 veterans who'd killed themselves after leaving Riverside. She thought about how easy it would be to take the money and walk away. She thought about what kind of person she'd be if she did. I'm certain. Brennan smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional mask. Good. Let's burn their house down. The next week was a masterclass in institutional warfare. Brennan filed for a continuance on the employment hearing, citing insufficient time to review evidence and prepare adequate defense. Riverside's legal team objected, but the motion was granted anyway. That bought them until May 28th. Meanwhile, the media circus intensified. Channel 7 ran a story about veteran mistreatment at local VA facilities. They didn't name Riverside specifically, but anyone who knew anything could read between the lines. By May 15th, 3 more news outlets had picked up the story. Veteran advocacy groups started organizing protests outside the hospital. Sharon Mercer held a press conference on May 16th. Rachel watched it from her apartment, sitting on the couch with her laptop, while eating cereal that had gone soggy 10 minutes ago. Sharon stood behind a podium wearing professional makeup and an expression of practiced concern. Riverside Veterans Hospital is committed to providing the highest quality care to the brave men and women who have served our country. Recent allegations regarding our treatment protocols are based on incomplete information and misunderstandings about complex psychiatric cases. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and are confident that our staff acted appropriately and in accordance with established medical guidelines. A reporter shouted a question. Is it true you tried to remove a service dog from a decorated combat veteran without proper authorization? Sharon's smile didn't waver. Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing specific cases. What I can tell you is that decisions regarding animal safety in healthcare environments are made carefully and with input from multiple specialists. Are you investigating the nurse who reported the violations? We have ongoing personnel reviews as part of our standard quality assurance processes. I can't comment on individual employees. Rachel turned off the live stream before she threw something at the screen. Her phone rang immediately. Brennan, you watching this? Just turned it off. She's good. I'll give her that. Brennan sounded almost impressed. She didn't admit to anything actionable, but she managed to paint herself as the reasonable authority figure dealing with unfair attacks. That's going to play well with people who don't know the full story. So what do? We wait. Agent Torrens is scheduled to release preliminary findings from the DoD investigation on May 20th. Once that becomes public record, Sharon's carefully crafted narrative falls apart. Brennan paused. In the meantime, I need you to stay off social media. Don't read the comments. Don't respond to messages. Just sit tight. Rachel tried. She really did. But by May 18th, she'd violated Brennan's instructions and was hate-reading Twitter threads about herself. Half the comments called her a hero. The other half called her an attention-seeking liar, trying to destroy a dedicated healthcare professional's career. Someone had posted her home address. Another account had shared photos of her apartment building with speculation about how someone could accidentally start a fire there. Rodriguez called at 2300 hours that night. Pack a bag. You're moving to a hotel. Rachel's blood went cold. Why? Because we've identified credible threats against you, and I'm not waiting around to see if someone's stupid enough to act on them. Rodriguez's tone left no room for argument. There's a Marriott 4 blocks from the Federal Building downtown. I've already booked you a room under a different name. You're checking in tonight. This is insane, and this is reality. People get hurt in situations like this. I'm not letting you be one of them. Rodriguez rattled off an address. Pack enough for 2 weeks. Don't tell anyone where you're going, except Brennan and Agent Torrens. I'll meet you in the lobby in 45 minutes. Rachel packed in a daze. Clothes, laptop, toiletries, the folder of documentation she'd been keeping updated. She left her apartment at 23:30 hours and drove to the hotel with one eye on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following her. Rodriguez was waiting in the lobby, dressed in civilian clothes with a tactical backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked like she could kill someone with a rolled-up newspaper. Room 847, 8th floor. Don't order room service under your real name. Keep the deadbolt locked. If anything feels wrong, you call me immediately. Rodriguez handed her a key card. I'm serious about this, Rachel. People are angry. Some of them are unhinged. You need to be careful. How long do I stay here? Until the DoD report goes public and things calm down, or until we identify whoever's making the threats and neutralize them. Rodriguez's expression softened fractionally. I know this sucks, but you're doing the right thing. Rachel rode the elevator to the 8th floor, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. The room was generic hotel standard, beige walls, queen bed, desk with a chair that would destroy her back if she sat in it too long. She locked the door, set her bag down, and sat on the edge of the bed trying to remember how to breathe normally. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. You should have taken the money. Last chance to back out before people get hurt. Rachel screenshot the message and forwarded it to Rodriguez and Torrens without responding. 2 minutes later, Rodriguez called back. We're tracing that number. Don't engage. Just document and send to me. How much worse is this going to get? Honestly, I don't know. But I've seen cases like this before. Usually the threats are just intimidation. People trying to scare you into silence. Occasionally someone's dumb enough to act on it. Rodriguez paused. You carrying any kind of personal protection? No. Might want to consider it. Pepper spray, personal alarm, something, just in case. Rachel ended the call and stared at the wall for a long time. She must have fallen asleep eventually because she woke up at 0634 hours to sunlight streaming through gaps in the blackout curtains. Her phone was buzzing with notifications. The DoD Inspector General had released their preliminary report 6 hours ahead of schedule. Rachel opened the document with shaking hands and started reading. Preliminary investigation findings. Riverside Veterans Hospital, Columbus, Ohio. After review of documentation, witness testimony, and facility records, this office has identified multiple systematic violations of federal veteran protection statutes, including, but not limited to, failure to provide trauma-informed care to patients with documented PTSD, unauthorized attempts to remove certified service animals from veteran patients, use of physical restraints and forced sedation without proper medical justification, inadequate staff training regarding military service animal protocols, retaliatory actions against staff members who reported concerns. Of particular concern are cases involving 6 veterans admitted between November 2024 and April 2025, who experienced similar patterns of mistreatment. 2 of these individuals died by suicide within 6 months of discharge. This office is recommending immediate remedial action, including mandatory staff retraining, policy revisions, and potential loss of VA facility certification pending further review. Rachel's hands were shaking by the time she finished reading. The report went on for 47 pages, documenting everything with clinical precision. Names were redacted, but anyone familiar with the case would know exactly who they were talking about. Her phone rang. Brennan, you read it? Yes. Congratulations. You just changed the entire veteran care system in Ohio. Brennan's voice carried grim satisfaction. Riverside's legal team is going to be in full panic mode. The board is probably having an emergency meeting right now, and Sharon Mercer's career is effectively over. What happens next? Now we negotiate from a position of strength. They're going to offer you a much bigger settlement, probably $500,000, and they're going to beg you not to file a civil suit. We're going to turn them down and file anyway. Because this isn't just about you anymore. This is about making sure no other veteran gets treated the way Ethan Cross did. Rachel closed her eyes. When do we file? Monday morning, 900 hours. I'll need you at my office by 8:30 to review the final paperwork. Brennan paused. After that, there's no going back. You ready? I've been ready since the day I met Ethan. Good answer. The weekend passed in a blur of news coverage and phone calls. Veteran organizations started holding press conferences demanding accountability. Former Riverside employees began coming forward with their own stories of being pressured to ignore warning signs or cover up incidents. The hospital's PR machine went into overdrive, releasing statements about commitment to improvement and cooperation with investigators. Sharon Mercer was notably absent from all of it. On Sunday afternoon, Rachel got a call from a number she didn't recognize, but Virginia area code. Hello? Nurse Donovan? It's Ethan Cross. Rachel sat up straight. Sergeant Cross, how are you? Better. A lot better, actually. His voice sounded different, steadier, less hollow. I wanted to call and thank you for everything. Rodriguez showed me the DOD report. I can't believe you did all that. I just told the truth. Yeah, well, most people don't have the guts to do that. He paused. Havoc's doing really well. They've got him in a program here with other retired MWDs. He's actually relaxing for the first time in years. It's good to see. Rachel felt her throat tighten. I'm glad. Listen, I know you're dealing with a lot of blowback right now. I know Riverside's trying to destroy you. If you need anything, money, a place to stay, someone to testify on your behalf, you tell me. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. The hell I don't. Ethan's voice went hard. You stood up for me when nobody else would. You risked your entire career to do the right thing. That kind of loyalty matters. So if you need backup, you've got it. Understood? Understood. After the call ended, Rachel sat in her hotel room feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Rachel met Brennan at the law office at 08:15 hours. They reviewed the civil complaint one final time, 63 pages detailing every violation, every piece of evidence, every witness statement. It was brutal and thorough and completely airtight. At 0900 hours exactly, they filed with the federal courthouse. By 9:30, Rachel's phone was ringing off the hook. Reporters wanting comments, veteran organizations wanting to offer support, 3 different law firms wanting to discuss class action possibilities. And then, at 10:47 hours, a call from Riverside's legal counsel. Brennan answered on speaker. Ms. Brennan, this is Beverly Walsh from Riverside Veterans Hospital. I'd like to discuss a resolution to this matter before it escalates further. I'm listening. We're prepared to offer Ms. Donovan a settlement of $750,000, full benefits continuation for 2 years, and a neutral employment reference. In exchange, she agrees to drop the civil suit and signs a comprehensive NDA. Brennan looked at Rachel. Rachel shook her head. My client declines. Silence on the other end. Then, that's a very generous offer, Ms. Brennan. I strongly encourage you to advise your client to reconsider. My client is aware of the offer and has rejected it. We're proceeding with litigation. If you do this, we will fight. We have resources you can't match. We'll drag this out for years. By the time it's over, Ms. Donovan will be broke and unemployable. Then I guess we'll see you in court. Brennan ended the call. Rachel felt strangely calm. How long until trial? 8 to 12 months, maybe longer if they file for delays. Brennan smiled. But here's the thing. Every day this stays in the news, more damage it does to their reputation. Every veteran who comes forward with their own story makes their position weaker. They're going to lose revenue, they're going to lose certification, and they're going to lose staff who don't want to work for an organization under federal investigation. So we're winning. We're winning. Brennan leaned back in her chair. Now comes the hard part. Living with the consequences. She wasn't wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel watched her entire professional life disintegrate. Her nursing license was placed under review by the state board, a clear retaliation move orchestrated by people with connections. Former coworkers gave interviews painting her as difficult and insubordinate. Someone leaked her employment file to a local blogger who published selective excerpts designed to make her look unstable. The hate mail got worse. So did the threats. Rodriguez assigned her a security detail, a retired Marine named Catherine Voss, who followed Rachel everywhere and looked like she could bench press a car. Having a bodyguard made Rachel feel simultaneously safer and more paranoid. On May 28th, the postponed employment hearing finally happened. Rachel sat in a conference room with Brennan, while Sharon Mercer and 3 hospital attorneys presented their case for termination. They cited insubordination, policy violations, and conduct unbecoming of a healthcare professional. Brennan tore them apart in under 90 minutes. She presented the DOD report. She played audio recordings of Sharon ordering staff to sedate Ethan before removing Havoc. She showed email chains proving the hospital knew about the federal protections and chose to ignore them anyway. By the end, Sharon looked like she'd aged 10 years. The panel ruled in Rachel's favor, no termination. full reinstatement with back pay, and a formal written apology from the hospital administration. Rachel walked out of that building feeling like she'd just won a war. She was wrong. The real war started 3 days later when someone firebombed her apartment building. Rachel was at the hotel when she got the call from her landlord at 0247 hours. She threw on clothes and drove to her building with Catherine Voss following in a separate vehicle. By the time they arrived, fire trucks had the blaze mostly contained, but the damage was catastrophic. Her third-floor apartment was completely destroyed. So were 4 others. Nobody was killed, but 2 people were hospitalized for smoke inhalation. A detective named Morgan Price met her at the police barricade. "Ms. Donovan, I need to ask you some questions." They stood on the sidewalk while firefighters continued working behind the tape. Rachel answered every question mechanically: where she'd been, who might want to hurt her, whether she'd received specific threats recently. "We found accelerant residue at 3 separate ignition points," Detective Price said. "This wasn't accidental. Someone wanted your building to burn." Rachel watched smoke pour from what used to be her living room window. Everything she owned was gone. Photos, documents, the few personal items she'd kept from her deployments overseas, all of it reduced to ash because she'd refused to stay silent. "Am I in danger?" "Yes." Price didn't sugarcoat it. "Whoever did this is escalating. Arson is a significant step up from threatening texts. You need to take this seriously." Catherine Voss stepped closer. "She's already under protection. I'm increasing security protocols effective immediately." Price handed Rachel a card. "If you remember anything else, call me directly, day or night." Rachel took the card with numb fingers. By morning, the story was everywhere. Whistleblower nurse targeted in arson attack. The media coverage exploded. Veteran groups organized rallies. Social media erupted with support and condemnation in equal measure. And then, at 15:34 hours on May 31st, Sharon Mercer was arrested. Rachel was in Brennan's office when the news broke. They watched the footage together, police leading Sharon out of the hospital in handcuffs while cameras flashed. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled. Her face was blank with shock. "They found communications between her and a private security contractor," Brennan said quietly. "Text messages discussing removing obstacles and neutralizing threats. The contractor they hired turned out to be the guy who firebombed your building. He flipped the second police brought him in." Rachel couldn't speak. "Sharon Mercer is going to prison," Brennan continued. "Attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, witness intimidation. She's looking at 20 years minimum, and Riverside is finished. The board announced an hour ago that they're shutting down the psychiatric unit entirely pending restructuring." Rachel sat down before her legs gave out. "It's over?" "The criminal case is over. Sharon's done. But our civil suit is still active. We're going after the hospital administration, the board of directors, everyone who enabled this." Brennan's expression was fierce. "We're going to make sure this never happens again." Rachel's phone buzzed. Text from Ethan Cross. "Just heard about the arrest. You okay?" She typed back with shaking hands. "I think so. Still processing." The response came immediately. "You saved my life. Never forget that. Whatever happens next, you've got people who have your back." Rachel closed her eyes and let herself cry for the first time since this entire nightmare started. When she finally pulled herself together, Brennan was watching her with something like respect. "You did it," the attorney said softly. "Against every possible odd, you actually won." Rachel wiped her eyes. "Doesn't feel like winning." "It never does. Not at first." Brennan stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown Columbus. "But 10 years from now, some veteran is going to walk into a hospital and get the care they deserve because of what you did. They'll never know your name. They'll never know what it cost you, but they'll be alive because you refused to back down." Rachel thought about Ethan sitting in room 412, exhausted and alone and forgotten by everyone who should have protected him. She thought about the 2 veterans who hadn't survived their stays at Riverside. She thought about Havoc lying beside the bed, the only thing standing between his handler and complete collapse. And she thought about the fact that it had taken one nurse with nothing to lose to expose a system that had been failing people for years. "What happens to me now?" Rachel asked. Brennan turned away from the window. "That depends. What do you want?" Rachel took a long breath. "I want to work again. I want to help people. I want to make sure this matters. Then that's what we'll do." Brennan smiled. I've got contacts at Walter Reed and VA hospitals across the country, places that actually value nurses who give a damn, places where your reputation as a whistleblower makes you an asset instead of a liability. You're not going to work in Columbus again, but you're not done nursing. When? Soon. First we finish the civil trial. Then we figure out what's next. Brennan walked back to her desk and pulled out a file folder. In the meantime, DOD wants to give you something. She slid the folder across the desk. Rachel opened it and found an official-looking certificate with Department of Defense letterhead. In recognition of exceptional courage and dedication in protecting the rights and dignity of America's veterans, the Department of Defense hereby awards Rachel Donovan the Secretary of Defense Medal for Valor. Her actions exemplify the highest standards of integrity and service. Below that was a letter signed by Colonel Marcus Webb. Chief Cross told me you don't think you did anything special. He's wrong. You did what most people are too afraid to do. You saw someone who needed help and you helped them, even when it meant risking everything. That kind of courage is rare. The military takes care of its own. That includes people who take care of us. Rachel stared at the documents until the words blurred. She'd lost her apartment, her job security, her sense of safety. She'd been threatened, investigated, and nearly killed. Her professional reputation in Columbus was destroyed. She'd probably never work in this city again. But she'd also saved a man's life, exposed systematic abuse, changed policy for thousands of veterans across the state. And somewhere in Virginia, a retired combat dog named Havoc was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years because one nurse had refused to look the other way. Maybe that was enough. Rachel was putting the certificate back in the folder when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Ms. Donovan, this is Captain James Mitchell. We met at Riverside. I remember. How can I help you, Captain? I'm calling because Chief Cross asked me to reach out. There's something you need to know. Mitchell's voice dropped lower. 3 days ago, we received intelligence that Sharon Mercer wasn't working alone. She had help from someone higher up the chain, someone with access to resources beyond what a hospital director should have. Rachel felt ice spreading through her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying the person who ordered your apartment burned is in custody, but the person who paid for it isn't. Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. Who? We don't have a name yet, but we've traced financial transactions through 3 shell companies back to a medical consulting firm based in Chicago. The firm has contracts with 12 different hospitals across the Midwest, including Riverside. Mitchell paused. They specialize in risk management and reputation protection, the kind of work that sometimes crosses legal lines. You're telling me someone hired professionals to intimidate me? Or worse, Sharon Mercer didn't have the resources or connections to organize what happened to you. Someone bankrolled this operation and they're still out there. Mitchell's voice carried an edge now. Agent Torrens is working with FBI Financial Crimes Unit to trace the money. In the meantime, you need to stay protected. Rachel looked at Catherine Voss standing near the office door, hand resting casually near the concealed weapon at her hip. I've got security. Keep it that way. And Rachel? Mitchell's tone softened slightly. Chief Cross wanted me to tell you he's coming back to Columbus. He wants to testify at the civil trial. He says you stood for him when it mattered, and now it's his turn. The call ended before Rachel could respond. Brennan was watching her with sharp eyes. What was that about? Rachel relayed the conversation. By the time she finished, Brennan's expression had gone from concern to coldly analytical. A consulting firm. Brennan pulled out her laptop and started typing. That makes sense, actually. Riverside's board would have wanted plausible deniability. They hire a firm to handle their problem. The firm subcontracts to people willing to get their hands dirty, and the board can claim they had no knowledge of illegal activity. Can we prove it? If Torrens and the FBI can follow the money trail, yes. Brennan's fingers flew across the keyboard. But this changes our strategy. We're not just going after one hospital anymore. We're potentially looking at a conspiracy involving multiple parties across state lines. That's federal RICO territory. Rachel felt lightheaded. I just wanted to help a veteran keep his dog. And now you've exposed something much bigger. Brennan looked up from her screen. Corporate entities that protect institutional interests by any means necessary, including violence. If this goes where I think it's going, you're not just changing veteran care policy. You're potentially bringing down an entire network of corruption. I don't want to bring down a network. I just want to go back to nursing. Too late for that. Brennan's expression wasn't unsympathetic, just realistic. You opened this door, now we have to walk through it. Over the next 72 hours, Agent Torrens and the FBI Financial Crimes Unit worked with the kind of focused intensity that Rachel had only seen in combat zones. They traced payments from Riverside's operating accounts to a Chicago firm called Strategic Healthcare Solutions. From there, the money moved through two shell companies registered in Delaware before landing in the account of a private security contractor based in Cincinnati, the same contractor who'd hired the man currently in custody for the arson. But the paper trail didn't stop at Strategic Healthcare Solutions. Torrens called Rachel at 0342 hours on June 4th. She'd been asleep for maybe 90 minutes. We found the connection. Strategic Healthcare Solutions is a subsidiary of Castellan Group, a private equity firm that owns controlling interests in 43 hospitals across 11 states. Torrens sounded exhausted but grimly satisfied. Including Riverside. Rachel sat up in the hotel bed. Private equity owns the hospital? Bought it in 2021, standard leveraged buyout. They loaded Riverside with debt, cut costs everywhere they could, and started running it for maximum profit extraction. Torrens paused. When you expose the veteran care violations, you threaten their revenue stream. The DoD investigation put their VA certification at risk. That's 30% of annual income gone. So they activated their risk management subsidiary to neutralize the threat. Me. You. Torrens' voice hardened. We've got emails now. Internal communications between Castellan executives discussing eliminating problematic personnel and containing damage through alternative channels. The language is carefully coded, but the intent is clear. Rachel felt cold spreading through her chest. How high does this go? All the way to the top. CEO of Castellan Group is a man named Preston Whitmore, Harvard MBA, former McKinsey consultant, currently on the board of 3 major healthcare industry associations. He signed off on the payments to Strategic Healthcare Solutions. Torrens let that sink in. We're building a case for conspiracy to commit assault, witness intimidation, and attempted murder. Federal prosecutors are getting involved. This is going to be big. When? Soon. But I need you to understand something, Rachel. These people have resources we can barely comprehend. They're going to fight with everything they have. They'll hire the best lawyers money can buy. They'll drag this out for years if they can. And they're going to try to destroy you in the process. They already tried to kill me. How much worse can it get? A lot worse. Trust me. The call ended. Rachel sat in the darkness of her hotel room and tried to process what she'd just learned. She'd thought this was about one hospital, one corrupt director, one failed system. But it wasn't. It was about an entire industry structured around profit over care, where patients were revenue streams and whistleblowers were threats to be eliminated. Catherine Voss knocked on the connecting door between their rooms. You okay? No. Good. Scared keeps you sharp. Catherine walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the hotel lobby. Heard your phone ring. Bad news? Rachel took the coffee and filled her in. Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively darker. Private equity, Catherine said when Rachel finished. Of course, I've seen this before. They buy up hospitals, strip out everything that isn't immediately profitable, then squeeze the staff and patients for every dollar they can extract. When someone pushes back, they crush them. You sound like you have experience with this. I do. My sister worked at a hospital in Michigan that got bought by a private equity firm. They cut nursing staff by 40%, eliminated benefits, and started pressuring doctors to prioritize billing codes over patient care. When my sister reported safety violations, they fired her and blacklisted her across the entire state. Catherine's jaw tightened. She ended up leaving nursing entirely. Last I heard, she was working retail in Detroit. Rachel thought about the 2 veterans who died after leaving Riverside. About Ethan sitting in room 412, being treated like a problem instead of a person. About all the other patients who'd suffered because institutions cared more about profit margins than human beings. This has to stop. Then we make sure it does. Catherine raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. But first, we keep you alive long enough to testify. The civil trial was scheduled to begin on June 15th. That gave them 11 days to prepare while the federal investigation into Castellan Group continued running parallel. Brennan worked 18-hour days gathering evidence and deposing witnesses. Agent Torrens coordinated with FBI and DOD investigators to build the criminal case. And Rachel lived in a hotel room with a bodyguard, watching her entire life play out on national news. The media coverage intensified as details of the Castellan connection emerged. Veteran advocacy groups organized protests outside private equity offices in New York. Former hospital employees from facilities across the country started coming forward with their own stories of cost-cutting measures that endangered patients. Congressional representatives began calling for hearings on private equity ownership of healthcare facilities. Preston Whitmore gave exactly one interview to the Wall Street Journal, where he denied any knowledge of illegal activity and claimed strategic healthcare solutions operated independently with full autonomy. The article painted him as a successful businessman, being unfairly targeted by activists with an anti-corporate agenda. Brennan read the article and laughed. He just made our case easier. We've got emails with his signature authorizing the payments. He's lying under oath to a major publication. That's going to look great in front of a jury. On June 9th, 6 days before trial, Ethan Cross arrived in Columbus. Rachel met him at a secure location, a conference room at the federal building downtown with Agent Torrens present. Ethan looked different than she remembered. Still lean and wiry, still carrying that military bearing, but something in his face had eased. The 1,000-yard stare was gone. He looked present in a way he hadn't been at Riverside. Havoc was with him, moving with smooth confidence at his handler's side. The dog's coat was glossy and healthy. His eyes were alert but calm. "Sergeant Cross," Rachel said. "It's just Ethan now." He crossed the room and did something Rachel didn't expect. He pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. "Thank you. For everything." Rachel's throat tightened. "How are you doing?" "Better, a lot better." Ethan gestured to Havoc. "They've got him in a program with other retired MWDs. He's learning how to be a normal dog again. Well, as normal as a dog who's been to Afghanistan 3 times can be." "And you?" "Therapy. Actual trauma-informed therapy from people who understand what I went through. It's helping." Ethan's expression grew serious. "I heard about what happened to your apartment and about the people behind it. I'm here to make sure they pay for it." Agent Torrens stepped forward. "Chief Cross's testimony is going to be critical. He's our primary example of how Riverside's policies directly harmed veterans. When he tells his story in court, it's going to be devastating." "They're going to try to discredit me," Ethan said quietly, "paint me as unstable, claim my PTSD makes me an unreliable witness." "Let them try." Brennan had arrived while they were talking. She set her briefcase down and looked at Ethan with open assessment. "How are you with public speaking?" "I've briefed generals and foreign military commanders. I can handle a courtroom." "Good. Because we're going to put you on the stand, and you're going to tell the jury exactly what Riverside did to you. No sugarcoating, no military stoicism, just raw truth." Ethan nodded once. "When?" "Day 2 of trial, if everything goes according to plan." Brennan pulled out a file folder. "In the meantime, we prep. I need to know every detail of your time at Riverside. Every conversation, every interaction, every time someone made you feel less than human." They spent 4 hours going through Ethan's testimony. By the end, even Torrens looked shaken. "They really did treat you like an animal," the agent said quietly. "Yeah, they did." Ethan's voice was flat. "Right up until Rachel reminded them I was a person." Rachel felt something shift in the room, a collective determination that transcended individual motivations. They weren't just fighting for justice anymore. They were fighting to prove that human dignity mattered more than institutional convenience or corporate profit. The night before trial, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling while Catherine Voss moved around the connecting room doing security checks. Around 0200 hours, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop the lawsuit. Last warning. You have 12 hours. Rachel screenshot it and sent it to Torrens without comment. His response came back immediately. "Location traced to burner phone purchased in Cincinnati 3 days ago. Can't track beyond that. Stay alert." Rachel set the phone down and tried to slow her racing heart. Whoever was behind this wasn't giving up. Even with Sharon Mercer in custody, even with the FBI building a case against Castellan Group, someone out there still thought they could intimidate her into silence. They were wrong. June 15th arrived with heavy clouds and humidity that made the air feel thick. Rachel dressed in the professional clothing Brennan had helped her select. Conservative suit, minimal jewelry, nothing that would distract from her testimony. Catherine drove her to the courthouse with 2 additional security personnel following in a second vehicle. The scene outside was chaos. News vans lined the street. Protesters from veteran organizations held signs demanding accountability. Counter-protesters hired by pro-corporate groups held signs defending private equity's role in healthcare. Police had set up barriers to keep the 2 groups separated. Rachel walked through the gauntlet with Catherine at her side, ignoring shouted questions from reporters. Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller and more intimate than she'd expected. The jury box was empty. They'd spend the morning on selection. Riverside's legal team occupied a table on the right, 4 attorneys in expensive suits, looking confident. Brennan sat alone at the plaintiff's table, organized files stacked neatly in front of her. Rachel took her seat beside Brennan, while Catherine positioned herself near the back of the courtroom. "You ready?" Brennan asked quietly. "No." "Good." Nervous witnesses are believable witnesses. Brennan's expression was calm. "Remember what we practiced. Answer the questions clearly. Don't volunteer information. If you don't know something, say so, and most importantly, tell the truth. That's our weapon." The judge entered, a woman in her 60s named Helena Cortez with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. Everyone stood until she took her seat. "Be seated. We're here for Donovan versus Riverside Veterans Hospital and associated parties. Before we begin jury selection, I want to address something." Judge Cortez looked directly at the defense table. "I've received multiple motions to dismiss this case on various grounds. All denied. I've also been made aware of ongoing federal investigations into witness intimidation and conspiracy. Let me be absolutely clear. Any further attempts to interfere with witnesses or officers of this court will result in immediate sanctions and referral for criminal prosecution. Am I understood?" The lead defense attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Let's proceed." Jury selection took 6 hours. By 1600 hours, they had 12 jurors and 2 alternates, a mix of ages, backgrounds, and occupations. Brennan had struck anyone with obvious connections to healthcare administration or corporate interests. The defense had struck anyone with military service in their immediate family. What remained was a jury that looked genuinely neutral. Judge Cortez adjourned until the following morning. Opening statements begin at 0900 hours. Both parties will be prepared. Rachel walked out of the courthouse feeling like she'd just run a marathon. Catherine bundled her into the vehicle and they drove back to the hotel through evening traffic. "How'd it go?" Catherine asked. "The jury looks normal. I don't know if that's good or bad. Normal's fine. Normal people understand injustice when you explain it clearly." Catherine glanced in the rearview mirror, checking for tails out of habit. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow's when the real work starts." Rachel tried. She ate a hotel restaurant meal that tasted like cardboard, showered, and climbed into bed at 2100 hours. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by anxiety and nightmares about walking into the courtroom to find it empty. At 0630 hours, she gave up and started getting ready. Catherine drove her to the courthouse at 0815 hours. The protest crowd had doubled in size overnight. Rachel recognized some faces from veteran organizations she'd spoken with. Others were strangers holding signs that ranged from supportive to hostile. Inside the courtroom, Brennan was already at the plaintiff's table reviewing notes. She looked up when Rachel sat down. "You look terrible." "Didn't sleep much." "Neither did I." Brennan slid a bottle of water across the table. "Drink this. Stay hydrated. And remember, we're telling a simple story. Veteran needed help. Hospital failed him. Nurse did the right thing. Hospital retaliated. Everything else is just details supporting that narrative." The defense team arrived at 0845 hours. Their lead attorney was a man named Gerald Hawthorne, who looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate law recruitment poster. Silver hair, perfect suit, expression of absolute confidence. He made eye contact with Rachel once and smiled. It wasn't friendly. At 0900 hours exactly, Judge Cortez entered. Everyone rose. Opening statements. "Ms. Brennan, you may proceed." Brennan stood and buttoned her jacket. She walked to the jury box and looked at each juror individually before speaking. This case is about a nurse who did her job and a hospital that tried to destroy her for it. The facts are straightforward. Rachel Donovan is a combat veteran who served as a medic in Afghanistan. When she was assigned to care for Ethan Cross, a decorated special operations soldier suffering from PTSD, she recognized that he needed trauma-informed care. She advocated for him when others dismissed him as difficult or dangerous, and when hospital administration tried to separate Mr. Cross from his certified service dog in violation of federal law, Nurse Donovan refused to participate. Brennan paused, letting that sink in. For doing her job correctly, for following the law, for protecting a veteran's rights, she was threatened, investigated, placed on administrative review, and ultimately targeted for elimination. Someone firebombed her apartment building. She lost everything she owned. 2 of her neighbors were hospitalized, all because she refused to look the other way when she saw injustice. One juror, an older black woman in the front row, was already nodding. The defense is going to tell you this case is complicated. They're going to talk about hospital policies and administrative procedures and risk management protocols. They're going to try to make you forget that at the center of this case are 2 very simple questions. Did Rachel Donovan do the right thing? And should she have been punished for it? Brennan returned to her seat. Gerald Hawthorne stood and approached the jury with the easy confidence of someone who'd won 100 cases just like this. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a nurse who violated multiple hospital policies, ignored chain of command, and made unilateral decisions that put patients and staff at risk. The plaintiff would have you believe she's a hero. The evidence will show she's someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her. Rachel felt anger stirring in her chest, but kept her expression neutral. Riverside Veterans Hospital employs over 300 dedicated healthcare professionals who work every day to serve our veterans. When one employee decides she knows better than everyone else, when she refuses direct orders from her supervisors, when she contacts outside parties about confidential patient information without authorization, that's not heroism. That's insubordination. Hawthorne gestured broadly. Yes, Mr. Cross is a veteran. Yes, he deserved compassionate care. But hospital administration has to balance the needs of one patient against the safety of all patients and staff. When a dog exhibits aggressive behavior, and the evidence will show this animal attacked multiple staff members, administration has an obligation to address that risk. Ms. Donovan disagreed with how they chose to address it. That's her right. What she doesn't have the right to do is ignore proper channels and act as though hospital policy doesn't apply to her. He returned to his seat looking satisfied. Judge Cortez looked at Brennan. Call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Rachel Donovan to the stand. Rachel stood on legs that felt unsteady and walked to the witness box. The bailiff swore her in. She sat down and looked out at the courtroom, the jury watching with cautious interest, Brennan at the table organizing notes, Hawthorne leaning back in his chair like this was already won. In the back row, Catherine Voss gave her a small nod. Brennan approached. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Rachel Donovan, I'm a registered nurse. Can you tell the jury about your background? Rachel took a breath. I enlisted in the Army at 21. I completed combat medic training and was deployed to Afghanistan 3 times between 2018 and 2022. I worked with evacuation teams, treating casualties in field hospitals. After my service, I attended nursing school on the GI Bill and received my RN license in 2024. And when did you begin working at Riverside Veterans Hospital? April 27th, 2025. What were your initial impressions of the facility? Rachel chose her words carefully. The staff seemed overworked and understaffed. The psychiatric unit particularly had high turnover. I was assigned there on my 2nd week, despite having no specialized psychiatric training. Why do you think you were assigned to psychiatric care without proper training? Hawthorne stood. Objection calls for speculation. Sustained. Brennan nodded. Let me rephrase. What did your supervisor tell you when she assigned you to the 4th floor psychiatric unit? She said I needed toughening up. That 4th floor would either make me or break me. One of the jurors, a middle-aged man in a factory uniform, frowned at that. And when you arrived on the 4th floor, you were assigned to care for Ethan Cross. Can you describe your first impression of Mr. Cross? Rachel thought back to that moment in the hallway, looking through the reinforced window at a man who'd arranged his room like a combat position. He was exhausted, hypervigilant, defensive, but not dangerous. He was acting exactly how someone with military training and untreated PTSD would act in an environment they perceived as threatening. And the dog? Havoc was doing his job, protecting his handler. Military working dogs are trained to assess threats and respond appropriately. Everyone approaching Mr. Cross was approaching incorrectly, so Havoc was responding defensively. What do you mean by approaching incorrectly? They'd rush in with multiple people, making noise, crowding him. That triggers a combat response. I approached the way you'd approach any operator in a heightened state. Slowly, announced my presence, asked permission to enter his space. And how did Mr. Cross respond? He spoke to me for the first time in 9 days. He told me about Havoc, about his service, about why the dog was so important to him. Rachel's voice steadied. He wasn't a difficult patient. He was a traumatized veteran being treated by people who didn't understand trauma. Brennan walked Rachel through the rest of it. Sharon's decision to remove Havoc, Rachel's refusal to sedate Ethan, the arrival of Colonel Webb, and the DoD investigators. With each answer, the narrative became clearer. By the time Brennan finished, 2 hours had passed and the jury looked engaged. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Cortez looked at the defense table. Mr. Hawthorne? The attorney stood and approached with that same confident smile. Ms. Donovan, how many years of psychiatric nursing experience did you have when you were assigned to Mr. Cross? None. So you had no specialized training in managing patients with PTSD or violent behavioral episodes? No formal training, but I had 3 years of field experience treating combat casualties with severe psychological trauma. Field experience isn't the same as clinical psychiatric training, is it? No, but sometimes field experience gives you perspective that clinical training doesn't. Hawthorne's smile tightened. When Director Mercer ordered you to sedate Mr. Cross before the dog removal, you refused, correct? Yes. You directly violated a supervisor's order? I refused to participate in a procedure I believed was medically inappropriate and legally questionable. But you're not a lawyer, are you? No? And you're not a hospital administrator? No? So you decided, based on your own judgment, that you knew better than everyone else involved. The director with 8 years of experience, the security team, the animal control professionals. Rachel felt the trap closing but kept her voice steady. I decided that separating a veteran from his certified service animal without proper authorization was wrong. The DoD investigation proved I was correct. Hawthorne pounced. The DoD investigation that only happened because you contacted military personnel about a patient's case without authorization, correct? I contacted the appropriate authorities when I witnessed potential violations of federal law. You violated patient confidentiality. I protected patient rights. They went back and forth for another hour, Hawthorne trying to paint her as insubordinate and arrogant, Rachel deflecting and reframing. By the time Judge Cortez called a break for lunch, Rachel felt wrung out. Brennan pulled her aside in the hallway. You did well. He's trying to make you look like a loose cannon, but you're coming across as principled. That plays well with juries. It doesn't feel like I did well. That's because cross-examination is designed to feel like an attack. But trust me, you're winning. Brennan glanced at her phone. Torrens just texted. Federal prosecutors are filing charges against Preston Whitmore and 3 Castellan executives this afternoon. Conspiracy, witness tampering, the whole package. Rachel felt something loosen in her chest. They're actually doing it? They're actually doing it. Brennan smiled. By tomorrow morning, this won't just be about one hospital. It'll be about an entire system of corporate corruption, and you'll be the person who exposed it. The afternoon session resumed at 1300 hours. Hawthorne continued his cross-examination, but the energy had shifted. News of the federal charges had reached the courtroom. People were checking phones. The defense team looked rattled. When Hawthorne finally finished, Judge Cortez looked at Brennan. Redirect? Just one question, Your Honor. Brennan approached Rachel. Knowing everything you know now, the retaliation, the investigation, the loss of your home, all of it, would you make the same choice again? Rachel didn't hesitate. Yes. Why? Because Ethan Cross deserved someone who saw him as a person instead of a problem. And because if I'd stayed silent, nothing would have changed. More veterans would have been hurt. Maybe more would have died. Rachel looked directly at the jury. I became a nurse to help people. Sometimes helping people means standing up when everyone else wants you to sit down. The courtroom went quiet. No further questions. Judge Cortez adjourned until the following morning. Rachel walked out of the courthouse into a media storm. News about the federal charges had broken while they were in session. Reporters were shouting questions about Castellan Group, about Preston Whitmore, about whether this was the biggest healthcare corruption scandal in a decade. Catherine got Rachel to the vehicle and they drove away while camera flashes exploded behind them. Back at the hotel, Rachel collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages of support from veteran organizations, interview requests from major news outlets, even a call from a literary agent asking if she'd considered writing a book about her experience. She ignored all of it. Around 1900 hours, someone knocked on her door. Catherine checked the peephole and then opened it. Ethan Cross walked in with Havoc at his side. "Heard you did good today," he said. "Felt like I got beat up." "That's court, designed to make you feel small." Ethan sat down in the chair by the window. Havoc settled at his feet. "I'm on the stand tomorrow. Brennan spent all afternoon prepping me. Apparently I'm going to destroy them." "You nervous?" "Terrified. I've breached terrorist compounds with less anxiety than I feel right now." He smiled slightly. "But I'm doing it anyway. Because you did it for me first." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Eventually, Ethan stood to leave. "One more thing," he said at the door. "Federal prosecutors want me to testify in the criminal case too, against the Castellan executives. They're building a RICO case, organized criminal enterprise operating through legitimate business structures. If it works, this could change how private equity operates in healthcare nationwide." Rachel looked at him. "Are you going to do it?" "Yeah, I am." Ethan's expression was determined. "Because this isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone who got hurt and everyone who might get hurt if nothing changes. Sometimes you have to fight even when you're scared. You taught me that." He left with Havoc padding silently beside him. Rachel lay in bed that night thinking about how strange it was that a random assignment to room 412 had led to this moment. Federal prosecutors building RICO cases, corporate executives facing prison time, an entire industry being forced to confront its failures. She just wanted to help one veteran keep his dog. Instead, she'd started a war. At 03:47 hours, her phone rang. Agent Torrens. "We just arrested Preston Whitmore at his home in Chicago. He tried to flee. Had a private jet on standby at Midway Airport." Torrens sounded exhausted but satisfied. "He's being arraigned tomorrow morning on 12 federal charges. The judge denied bail. He's not going anywhere." Rachel closed her eyes. "It's really over?" "The arrests are over. The trials are just beginning." Torrens paused. "But yeah, the people who tried to kill you are either in custody or about to be. You're safe now." She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt empty. The next morning, Ethan Cross took the stand and told his story. He described his service, his injuries, his struggles with PTSD. He described Havoc and what the dog meant to him. And he described his time at Riverside. The isolation, the fear, the constant sense that nobody understood or cared. Then he described meeting Rachel. "She walked into that room and the first thing she did was ask my permission. Nobody had done that since I'd been admitted. She treated me like I was still a person instead of just another problem to manage." Ethan's voice was steady, but emotion flickered beneath it. "When they tried to take Havoc, she put her career on the line to stop them. I don't think I'd be alive today if she hadn't. You could have heard a pin drop." Hawthorne tried to discredit him during cross-examination, questioned his mental state, suggested his PTSD made his perceptions unreliable, but it backfired spectacularly. The jury saw a decorated veteran being attacked for his service-related disability, and they didn't like it. Brennan called 6 more witnesses over the next 3 days. Security guards who'd witnessed the confrontation. Other nurses who testified about the hostile work environment. A DOD psychiatrist who explained trauma-informed care and why Riverside's approach was harmful. The defense called their own witnesses, hospital administrators who defended their policies, a veterinary behaviorist who testified that aggressive dogs posed legitimate safety risks. But it all felt hollow against the weight of evidence Brennan had assembled. On June 22nd, both sides delivered closing arguments. Brennan was devastating. She walked the jury through every violation, every piece of evidence, every moment where the hospital had chosen institutional protection over patient care. She ended by projecting a photo on the courtroom screen, Ethan and Havoc together, taken after his extraction. This is what we're fighting for, not abstract principles or corporate policies. Human beings and the right to be treated with dignity. The defense wants you to believe this case is complicated. It's not. They hurt people. They tried to silence the person who exposed them, and now they need to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. At 16:47 hours on June 23rd, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Veteran organizations cheered. Reporters scrambled for exits to file stories. Judge Cortez had to bang her gavel 3 times to restore order. Damages would be determined in a separate hearing, but Brennan told Rachel they were looking at 8 figures minimum. The hospital would likely declare bankruptcy. Castellan Group's reputation was destroyed. Private equity firms across the country were scrambling to review their healthcare holdings before federal investigators came knocking. Rachel sat at the plaintiff's table and felt tears running down her face. It was over. She'd won. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood in a conference room at the Department of Defense with Colonel Webb, Major Rodriguez, Agent Torrens, and Ethan Cross. A formal ceremony was being held to award her the Secretary of Defense Medal for Valor, the actual physical medal this time, not just the certificate. But before that happened, Torrens pulled her aside. "There's something you need to see." He handed her a folder. Castellan Group's files, seized during the federal raids. Rachel opened it and started reading. What she found made her blood run cold. Riverside wasn't the only facility where veterans had been mistreated. Castellan owned 43 hospitals. In 17 of them, investigators had found similar patterns: aggressive cost-cutting in veteran care, systematic violations of patient rights, and evidence of witness intimidation when people complained. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was buried on page 47 of the document. A memo from Preston Whitmore to his executive team, dated 3 months before Rachel had even been hired at Riverside. Risk management for high-cost patient populations. Analysis indicates veteran care programs represent significant liability exposure with minimal profit margins. Recommend systematic reduction of services and acceleration of discharge timelines. Any staff resistance should be addressed through standard HR protocols. Non-compliant employees should be terminated for cause to prevent whistleblower claims. Rachel looked up at Torrens. He planned this, the whole thing. It wasn't just Riverside. No, it was company policy. Torrens' expression was grim. We're finding evidence this goes back years. Dozens of facilities, hundreds of veterans, some alive, some dead, all of them hurt by a system designed to maximize profit by minimizing care. Rachel felt sick. How many people died? We're still counting, but it's more than 2, a lot more. She closed the folder with shaking hands. That evening, after the medal ceremony, after the congratulations and the press interviews and the formal speeches, Rachel sat alone in her hotel room and thought about what came next. Brennan had told her that at least 40 former Riverside employees were filing wrongful termination suits, that veterans from other Castellan facilities were coming forward with their own stories. The congressional hearings were scheduled for September. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in months, Rachel felt like she could actually breathe. Her phone buzzed. Text from Ethan. "Havoc and I are staying in Columbus for a while. Thought you might want some backup while you figure out what's next." Rachel smiled and typed back, "I'd like that." Another message came through, this one from an unknown number. "Ms. Donovan, this is Dr. Patricia Morrison from Walter Reed Medical Center. Colonel Webb suggested I reach out. We're establishing a new veteran trauma care program, and we need someone to help design protocols, someone who understands both military culture and nursing practice. Interested?" Rachel stared at the message for a long time. Then she started typing a response. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Columbus. Somewhere in the city, federal prosecutors were building cases that would send corporate executives to prison. Somewhere, veterans were reading news coverage and realizing they weren't alone. Somewhere, nurses were watching what had happened to Rachel and finding the courage to speak up about their own facilities. One person couldn't change everything, but one person could start something that couldn't be stopped. Rachel hit send on her message and waited to see what happened next. Dr. Morrison's response came through 40 minutes later while Rachel was still staring at her phone trying to convince herself this was real. Excellent. When can you start? We need someone in Bethesda by August 1st. Housing and relocation covered. Salary negotiable. This program could set the standard for veteran trauma care nationwide. You'd be building something from the ground up. Rachel read it 3 times. Then she called Brennan. They want me at Walter Reed, designing protocols for veteran trauma care. Brennan was quiet for a moment. That's perfect. You'd be doing exactly what you're good at, and you'd have institutional backing instead of fighting against it. I don't know if I can trust institutions anymore. Then change them from the inside. That's what this is. A chance to make sure what happened to Ethan never happens to anyone else. Brennan's voice softened. You've spent 3 months fighting. Maybe it's time to start building. Rachel thought about that after the call ended. Fighting versus building. Tearing down versus creating something better. She'd become good at the first part by necessity, but the second part terrified her in ways combat never had. At 800 hours the next morning, she met with Colonel Webb at a cafe near the federal building. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and a button-down shirt that made him look less intimidating but no less serious. You're thinking about Walter Reed, he said without preamble. How did you know? Because Dr. Morrison texted me after you replied. She wanted to make sure you were the real deal. Webb smiled slightly. I told her if she didn't hire you, she was making a massive mistake. Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I'm not qualified to design national protocols. I'm just a nurse who refused to follow bad orders. You're a combat medic who understands trauma, a whistleblower who exposed systematic corruption, and someone who fought a multi-billion-dollar corporation and won. That makes you exactly qualified. Webb leaned forward. The military has a problem, Rachel. We train people to survive war, but we don't train them to survive peace. We send them home broken, and then we're surprised when civilian systems can't handle them. You understand both sides. That's rare. What if I mess it up? Then you'll fix it. That's what good leaders do. Webb pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is what we're dealing with. Veteran suicide rates, PTSD treatment failure rates, homelessness statistics. It's bad, and it's been bad for decades. But you just proved that one person standing up can force an entire system to change. Imagine what you could do with actual resources and institutional support. Rachel opened the folder and felt the weight of numbers that represented real people. 22 veteran suicides per day, thousands living on streets, tens of thousands struggling with untreated trauma. She closed the folder. I'll do it, but I want Ethan involved. He knows what veterans need better than any protocol manual ever will. Already arranged. Dr. Morrison wants him as a consultant. Lived experience matters. Webb stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the fight that actually matters, Nurse Donovan. She shook his hand and felt something shift inside her, the exhaustion of the past months transforming into something that felt almost like purpose. On July 12th, Rachel attended Sharon Mercer's sentencing hearing. She sat in the back of the courtroom with Catherine Voss beside her, watching the woman who'd tried to destroy her face a judge. Sharon looked smaller somehow. Her perfect hair was pulled back simply. Her clothing was prison-issued. The arrogance that had defined her at Riverside was gone, replaced by something that looked like hollow defeat. The prosecutor read the charges. Conspiracy to commit assault. Witness intimidation. Attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, financial records, testimony from the contractor she'd hired. Judge Cortez looked at Sharon with an expression that mixed disappointment and disgust. You were in a position of trust. You were supposed to care for people at their most vulnerable. Instead, you weaponized your authority to silence someone who dared to challenge you. 23 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for 15. Sharon's attorney tried to argue for leniency. The judge cut him off. Your client ordered an arson attack that could have killed multiple people. She's fortunate the charge isn't murder. Cortez's voice was ice. Sentencing stands. They led Sharon away in handcuffs. She looked back once, directly at Rachel, and for a split second something like recognition passed between them. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just the acknowledgement that they'd both made choices and now they were living with the consequences. Rachel felt nothing watching her disappear through the side door. No triumph, no satisfaction, Just the quiet knowledge that justice, when it finally came, was often quieter than people expected. Preston Whitmore's trial began in August, while Rachel was settling into her new position at Walter Reed. She watched coverage from her office in Bethesda, where she was spending 14-hour days building a trauma care program from scratch, with input from Ethan, Dr. Morrison, and a team of psychiatrists who actually understood military culture. Whitmore's defense team argued he was a businessman following industry-standard practices. The prosecution buried them with evidence: the memo about reducing veteran care, the payments to Strategic Healthcare Solutions, testimony from executives who'd flipped to save themselves. The jury convicted him on 17 counts, 45 years in federal prison. Castellan Group declared bankruptcy within a week. Hospitals across the country scrambled to distance themselves from private equity ownership. Rachel read the verdict on her phone between meetings and allowed herself one moment of satisfaction before getting back to work. In September, she testified before Congress. The hearing room was packed with media, veteran organizations, and healthcare industry representatives who looked terrified of what she might say. Senator Catherine Walsh from Oregon led the questioning. Ms. Donovan, based on your experience, what would you recommend to prevent situations like Riverside from happening again? Rachel looked at the assembled committee, powerful people who could actually change things if they chose to. Stop treating healthcare like a commodity. Stop allowing profit margins to determine patient care, and start protecting the people who speak up when they see problems. She paused. I lost my home, my job security, and nearly my life because I refused to participate in veteran abuse. That shouldn't be the cost of doing the right thing. If you want to fix the system, make it safe for people to report problems without being destroyed for it. The room erupted in applause. Walsh let it continue for several seconds before gaveling for order. I think we have our answer. This committee will be drafting comprehensive whistleblower protection legislation for healthcare workers. We'll be calling it the Donovan Act. Rachel felt her throat tighten. Legislation named after her. Real change. Not just exposure, but actual policy reform that would protect others who found themselves in impossible situations. After the hearing, she stood on the Capitol steps doing interviews with networks she'd only ever watched on TV. Behind her, veteran organizations held signs with her photo and the words, "Hero for Heroes." She still didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd done what was necessary and survived the consequences. Ethan found her an hour later sitting alone in a hallway, overwhelmed by the attention. You good? He asked. I don't know what I am. You're someone who changed everything. He sat down beside her. Havoc settled between them, calm and content. You know how many messages I've gotten in the past month? From veterans saying they're finally getting proper care because facilities are terrified of another Riverside situation? From nurses saying they reported abuse they'd been ignoring because you showed them it was possible? You started something that's going to outlive both of us. Rachel looked at Havoc, at this dog who'd been at the center of everything, and felt something break loose inside her chest. I just wanted to help you keep your dog. I know, that's what made it matter. Ethan smiled. You weren't trying to be a hero or start a movement. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped them. The rest happened because you refused to stop. 3 months later, on a cold November morning, Rachel stood in front of 30 nursing students at Georgetown University. She'd been invited to give a guest lecture on advocacy and healthcare. The students looked young and idealistic and terrified of the clinical rotations ahead of them. Rachel remembered feeling exactly the same way. I'm going to tell you something your professors probably won't, she said. Being a good nurse doesn't mean following every order you're given. Sometimes it means recognizing when orders are wrong and having the courage to push back. You're going to encounter situations where policy conflicts with what's right. When that happens, you have to decide what kind of nurse you want to be. She told them about Ethan, about Room 412, about the choice between career safety and moral courage. I'm not going to pretend there aren't consequences. I lost almost everything. My apartment burned down. I was unemployed and broke and scared. But I also helped save a man's life and exposed corruption that was hurting hundreds of people. And now I get to build something better. She paused. So here's my advice. Document everything. Know the law. Find allies. And when you see injustice, don't assume someone else will handle it. Most of the time, that someone has to be you. One student raised her hand. What if we're too scared? Rachel thought about standing outside room 412, knowing her career was on the line, about refusing to sedate Ethan when Sharon ordered her to, about the moment she'd decided to fight back instead of taking the settlement money. Being scared is fine. Being too scared to act is how bad systems stay in place. She looked at each of them. You're training to take care of people at their most vulnerable. That's an enormous responsibility. Sometimes it means protecting them from the very institutions that are supposed to help them. If you're not willing to do that, maybe reconsider why you're here. The room was silent. Then one student started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire lecture hall was applauding. Rachel felt tears stinging her eyes, but she kept her expression steady until she could escape to the hallway. Dr. Morrison found her there 10 minutes later. That was quite a speech. I might have been too harsh. You were perfect. Those kids need to hear that nursing isn't just about following protocols. It's about protecting people even when it's hard. Morrison handed her a folder. Speaking of which, we got approval for the program expansion, 6 more facilities adopting our trauma care model, and the VA wants us to train their staff nationwide. Rachel opened the folder and saw Official Department of Veterans Affairs letterhead, implementation timeline, budget allocations, training schedules, real systematic change. We're actually doing this, she said quietly. We're actually doing this because you started it. Morrison smiled. You know what the real victory is? It's not the convictions or the settlements or the legislation. It's that 5 years from now, some veteran is going to walk into a hospital and get treated like a human being because of what you built. They'll never know your name, but they'll benefit from your courage. That evening, Rachel met Ethan at a small restaurant near Walter Reed. They'd fallen into a routine. Dinner once a week to decompress and remind each other why the exhausting work mattered. Havoc was with him, as always. The dog had gained weight and his coat gleamed with health. He still watched doorways and tracked movements, but the desperate edge was gone. He looked like what he was, a retired warrior learning to relax. How was Georgetown? Ethan asked. Intense. I told a room full of nursing students to break rules if they have to. Good. They need to hear it. Ethan cut into his steak. I got a call today from a guy I served with. He's been struggling since he got out. PTSD, homelessness, the whole deal. He saw the news coverage about you in Riverside, said it gave him the courage to reach out for help. He's checking into a treatment program tomorrow. Rachel felt her chest tighten. Because of the news? Because you showed him that someone gives a damn, that the system can be fought and beaten, that he's not alone. Ethan looked at her directly. You saved my life in that hospital room. But you saved his life too, and you've never even met him. That's what this means. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Through the restaurant window, Rachel could see people walking past. Normal lives, normal problems, normal evening routines. A world away from the chaos of the past 7 months. You ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly. Everything you gave up? Rachel thought about her apartment, about her old life in Columbus, about the version of herself who'd walked into Riverside on that first day thinking she was just starting another nursing job. No. I regret it took so long for someone to do something. I regret the 2 veterans who died before I got there. I regret that it took burning everything down to force change. She met his eyes. But I don't regret standing up. Because if I hadn't, you wouldn't be here. And neither would Havoc. And the system would still be hurting people. Ethan raised his water glass. To refusing to stay silent. Rachel clinked her glass against his. To doing what's right even when it costs everything. They drank to that. 2 people who'd survived war in different ways and found purpose in protecting others who couldn't protect themselves. 6 weeks later, Rachel stood in front of a full auditorium at Walter Reed during the official launch of the Veteran Trauma Care Initiative. Military leadership filled the front rows. Press cameras lined the back wall. Veteran organizations had sent representatives to witness what they'd been fighting for decades to achieve. Dr. Morrison gave the opening remarks. Colonel Webb outlined the program's scope. Then Rachel took the podium to explain the protocols they'd developed. Trauma-informed approaches, peer support integration, service animal accommodation standards, mandatory staff training on military culture. Everything she'd wished existed when she first met Ethan. This program exists because one veteran was failed by a system that should have protected him, she said. But it also exists because that veteran had someone willing to fight for him. My hope is that we're building something where that fight isn't necessary anymore, where veterans are treated with the dignity and respect they earned through their service, where speaking up about problems makes you valuable instead of vulnerable. The audience stood and applauded. Rachel saw Ethan in the third row with Havoc beside him. The dog's tail was wagging. After the ceremony, a young woman in Navy uniform approached Rachel nervously. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been struggling since I got out 2 years ago. PTSD, nightmares, the whole thing. I was too scared to get help because I didn't want to seem weak. But after seeing what you did, standing up even when everyone was against you, I finally checked into treatment. I've been in the program for 6 weeks now, and it's changing my life." Rachel felt tears threatening. "I'm glad you got help. I wouldn't have without you. You showed us we matter, that our struggles aren't just problems to be managed, but injuries that deserve real care." The woman's voice cracked. "You saved my life without ever meeting me. I just wanted you to know that." She walked away before Rachel could respond. Ethan appeared at Rachel's side. "You okay?" "Yeah, I think I finally am." They stood there together while the auditorium slowly emptied. Two people who'd survived impossible situations and used that survival to build something that would outlast them both. Rachel thought about the journey from room 412 to this moment, about every choice that had led here, about the nurse who'd been considered too soft, too green, too naive for the psychiatric unit. That nurse had exposed systematic corruption, changed federal policy, inspired legislation, and built a program that would help thousands of veterans get the care they deserved. Not bad for someone everyone had underestimated. Her phone buzzed. Text from Brennan. "Final settlement check cleared. $8.3 million after legal fees. What are you going to do with it?" Rachel looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "Setting up a foundation for nurses who face retaliation for whistleblowing. Nobody should have to choose between doing the right thing and financial survival." Brennan's response was immediate. "I'll handle the paperwork. You're going to change the entire healthcare industry, aren't you?" Rachel smiled and put her phone away. Maybe she would, or maybe she'd just make it a little bit harder for good people to be punished for having courage. Either way, it was a start. She looked at Ethan. "Ready to go?" "Where to?" "Wherever people need help." They walked out of Walter Reed together into the winter sunlight. A nurse who'd refused to be silenced, a veteran who'd survived when others hadn't, and a dog who'd protected them both when everything fell apart. 3 people who'd learned that the real battle wasn't surviving trauma. It was making sure nobody had to fight that battle alone. And they'd won. Not perfectly. Not without scars. Not without cost. But they'd won. And that was enough.